Elusive hopes. In the spring of 1999, the community of Southport in the United Kingdom was split into two camps. The media and television were filled with numerous interviews with Mitchell Key, a man who, though unremarkable at first, had become a true folk hero. His sudden popularity was sparked by a scandal, the mysterious disappearance of his wife, Lynsey Wilson. One day, she left home without a trace, leaving behind two young children. Her distraught husband appeared worried and abandoned, pleading for her to reconsider and return. Along the way, he shared details of their marital life, occasionally speaking unfavorably about his spouse. He believed her behavior was driven by a desire for a free and extravagant lifestyle. Mitchell mentioned seeing his former beloved driving around town in an expensive car, although she just passed by. Most likely, the grief-stricken mother had left her children for a wealthy fiancé. Despite the image portrayed on TV in reality, he was enjoying a bachelor's life. As a result, one segment of the population sympathized with the lonely man, offering him attention and support. The other doubted him and suspected him of a horrendous crime. While Mitchell enjoyed widespread attention, law enforcement continued to search for the missing woman. His persona did not inspire trust, and there were complications in the case. According to Lynsey's relatives and friends, the couple's relationship was different from what her husband claimed. Everyone who knew her considered her a faithful wife and caring mother. Therefore, they were convinced something terrible must have happened to Lynsey. Otherwise, she would have made contact long ago. Suspicion was fueled by Mitchell's words during a famous talk show. When the host asked if he had ended his wife's life, his guest said he would not respond to such an indecent question, then paused and added, "Wait and find out." What was the exemplary husband and father implying? Perhaps he knew more than he shared, or was he so confident in his innocence that he was just waiting for everything to fall into place? Answers to these and other questions are forthcoming. Stockholm Syndrome. This is a shocking story about the terrible consequences of Stockholm Syndrome. The term refers to the traumatic bond between an aggressor and a victim, resulting in the victims sympathizing with their aggressor and often defending and justifying their actions. A decade ago, this phenomenon was examined through the lens of the relationship between a criminal and a hostage. However, today it has become widely recognized in the context of domestic relationships, explaining the behavior of a spouse enduring physical and emotional abuse from their partner. Typically, the wife adopts the role of the victim, and the husband the tyrant. In most cases, domestic Stockholm Syndrome arises among individuals with a sacrificial mindset, attracting narcissistic characters whom they wish to heal and empower. And to ensure their tormentors do not feel alone, they are ready to share their pain. Let's not delve too deeply into psychology. The essence remains the same. Often, those who become victims of abuse are kind-hearted and empathetic people. Lynsey Wilson was one of them, a young woman who wanted to love and be loved. Her primary mistake was that she failed to recognize the object of her adoration in time. And as time passed, she struggled to escape from their codependent relationship. Lynsey's story. At 17, Lynsey discovered she was pregnant. Raised in a caring, large family, she hadn't imagined becoming a mother so early. She wasn't unprepared emotionally, but the fact that her boyfriend, with whom she'd been since she was 13, fled as soon as he learned about the impending fatherhood both upset and scared her. Lynsey knew all too well the physical and financial demands of motherhood. The Wilson family, though loving and close-knit, had often faced financial challenges. To provide for their children, her parents worked tirelessly. Therefore, when Lynsey met Mitchell Quee 5 months into her pregnancy, she considered it a gift of fate. Mitchell, a 20-year-old, acted like a true gentleman, being attentive and caring. Most importantly, her delicate condition did not deter him. Mitchell assured her he had fallen in love with Lynsey at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her and raise the child as his own. At that time, he was earning well and even started working extra hours so his beloved would want for nothing. The young couple's parents were shocked when they announced their decision to marry. They felt the 5-week-old relationship hadn't withstood the test of time and circumstances, and thus couldn't genuinely celebrate for them. The only thing Lynsey's relatives noted was that her former cheerfulness and good health had returned. At the same time, the new boyfriend seemed overly sweet to them. even cloyingly polite. Ultimately, no one interfered with their marriage, keeping their doubts to themselves. Red flag. The wedding took place in August 1995 within a close family circle. The majority of the guests were from the bride's side. The groom's side was represented by no more than 5 people: his parents, a brother, and 2 friends. During the celebration, Lynsey was ecstatic, believing she had won the lottery in life. However, the uneasy premonitions of Lynsey's relatives grew heavier when, by the end of the evening, the newlyweds had a dispute. The conflict unfolded before everyone's eyes. Something displeased Mitchell, and he started to shout loudly. It was unlikely that the reason was significant or appropriate for such a reaction. During the argument, he grabbed his new wife by the hand and started shaking her, which looked more than odd and threatening. Lynsey tried to calm him down. When the emotions subsided, the man apologized to everyone and later made light of the incident, emphasizing that it was just nerves due to the holiday bustle. At that moment, the girl did not give due attention to the situation and quickly forgot about it. However, in reality, it became one of the red flags in their toxic relationship. Diligent specialist. On February 5, 1999, a social worker officially reported Lynsey Key missing, expressing concern over being unable to reach her client. Lynsey had sought psychological support in a short period of their life together due to recurring incidents of domestic violence, and had bravely reported the situation at home. After her disclosure, the social worker had been monitoring the young family. She informed the police that she had been unable to contact Mrs. Key for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lynsey's husband would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. The dedicated worker mentioned that she repeatedly asked to speak directly to Lynsey, but received evasive excuses. During her visits, she consistently left her contact details, yet Lynsey never called back. The social worker found this situation unsafe and requested a welfare check. Law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, but were also unable to speak with Lynsey. Her husband Mitchell explained that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but did not consider her missing. According to him, on Christmas Eve, Lynsey had gone to a party with a friend and returned home early in the morning, somewhat intoxicated. They had an argument afterwards. Lynsey then packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. He claimed she left him for another man and no longer wanted any contact. Search efforts. The search for Lynsey began. During conversations with her relatives, officers learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th, appearing in high spirits and looking well, and her behavior was normal. Her family had grown accustomed to her troubled marriage. Lynsey's mother also reported that she had tried multiple times to reach her daughter on December 24th to arrange a visit to give Christmas gifts to the grandchildren. Unable to reach Lynsey, she decided to visit in person. That day, Mitchell answered the door with the children and told her that his wife had left with friends and accused her of infidelity. However, Mrs. Wilson had long learned to take her son-in-law's words with a grain of salt. After giving the gifts to the children, she left. Detectives found it strange that no one had been concerned about the young woman's well-being for 2 months. However, there was an explanation. Everyone knew that Mitchell restricted his wife's interactions with the outside world, even with close relatives. They had previously experienced difficulty communicating with her. Therefore, it was plausible for Lynsey to drop out of sight for a while. Nonetheless, this did not mean they were not concerned about her. The news alarmed them. Everyone asserted that she did not drink and led a modest lifestyle. Moreover, her husband had forbidden her all contact with the outside world, not to mention meetings with friends and acquaintances. Inconsistencies, everything Mr. Key told the police contradicted his character profile, arousing investigators' suspicions. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell could simply let his wife go, and that Lynsey would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. However, the situation demanded a thorough investigation. To this end, the police spoke with all of Lynsey's acquaintances and tried to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where the couple lived and its surroundings. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted. By the time Lynsey's disappearance was noted, Some time had elapsed. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person. On December 15th, she was at the local post office, sending several letters and postcards as usual. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day. Lynsey had visited despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea and a brief conversation, after which Lynsey saw her guest out. On the way, she slipped a note into her sister's hand and asked her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and in the whirlwind of days, forgot about it. Regrettably, the older sister couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lynsey again. Over several months, investigators tried to cling to any information. They began to suspect that she was no longer alive, as she had not been in contact for so long. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence. However, the more they learned about the couple's life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. Marriage. Shortly after their wedding, Mitchell and Lynsey decided to move away from their parents. They rented an apartment in Southport. Sometime later, Lynsey gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the joy of the new baby was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment he could be joking and laughing, the next he became unbalanced and aggressive. Trying to maintain a fragile peace at home, she didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. However, loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations. Mitchell would kneel, beg for forgiveness, and profess his love. It seemed for a while that peace had returned to the family. But then, the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lynsey began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening. They advised her to return home and end her suffering. But it was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time, her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control. He forbade his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricted her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Once, Lynsey confided to her older sister that she suspected her husband of infidelity. She told her about a woman who came to their home looking for him and was very surprised to learn he was married. That day, another argument erupted, but this time it escalated to physical violence. Gradually, physical abuse became a part of their life. To prevent his wife from complaining about him and tarnishing his reputation, the man began to limit her interactions, starting with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and later with her family. Despite being unhappy, Lynsey still tried to maintain contact secretly, fearing being discovered and punished. At the same time, despite the evident problems, Lynsey continued to stay with Mitchell. Along with her feelings, the comfortable life he provided was a factor. He earned well, supporting her and their child, paying the bills. She truly lacked nothing financially. Second chance. The era of living in a gilded cage came to an end for Mrs. Key when she found out she was pregnant again. At that moment, she was certain she no longer wanted more children. It's only fair to note that Mitchell was good to his stepdaughter, even loving her. However, Lynsey deemed the current circumstances unfavorable for bringing another child into the world and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When her husband learned of this, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. That same evening, she packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family breathed a sigh of relief. There she proceeded with the pregnancy as she had planned. Over time, however, she began to miss her husband. He wouldn't leave her alone, frequently calling and begging her to come back. Mitchell tried everything to prove he had changed. Eventually, he managed to convince Lynsey. Initially, everything went well, and it seemed as if their old feelings had returned. The Keys were expecting another child. This peace lasted for 6 months until Mitchell had a severe anger outburst. Fortunately, he did not direct his rage at his pregnant wife, but took it out on the apartment. He smashed everything he could see, destroyed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and even stained the walls with blood and food remnants. He threw the television out of the window and smashed the car parked outside. The landlord demanded not only compensation for the damage and repairs, but also that they vacate the apartment. This situation worsened the family's financial position, requiring additional expenses. As a result, the couple had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. You can't run from yourself. In October 1997, their son Jack was born. The father adored the boy. However, the relationship between the spouses became increasingly tense. Throughout their married life, Mitchell frequently left home, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a week, often over trivial or fabricated reasons. Lynsey had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior. Yet, when he abandoned her again, she filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. Apparently, she realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own. Therefore, she reached out to a local charity that assists women in difficult life situations. They helped her find subsidized housing in another city. Lynsey feared that Mitchell would discover her new address or phone number, so she took measures to distance herself from him. After he made several threats, she even obtained a restraining order from law enforcement. With the help of a therapist, she began to rebuild her life. She started a journal where she documented her life and experiences, intending to leave it to her children so they would never repeat her mistakes. The entries confirmed the relatives' claims about the difficult dynamics within the family. Despite her precautions, Mitchell discovered her phone number and incessantly called, demanding to see his son. With her newfound freedom, Lynsey felt lonely, and after a short time, she could not resist his persistence. They began communicating and seeing each other again, and eventually moved back in together. The mother of two was ashamed to admit her own weakness, so she told no one about it. Nevertheless, the secret came out. Relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by the reunion with the tyrant. They couldn't understand why she had let him back into her life. Mitchell remained unpopular with Lynsey's relatives. They, too, wanted nothing to do with him. Ultimately, their communication nearly ceased. Despite all efforts, Lynsey repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. Thus, her circle saw no point in trying to save her anymore, accepted the situation, and stepped back. However, this time, her decision proved to be fatal. Villain in disguise. At the outset of the investigation into Lynsey's disappearance, Mr. Key was initially helpful in the search efforts. However, as the case gained media attention, his focus shifted dramatically. He turned his misfortune into a public spectacle, becoming a media figure in the process. As Mitchell invited more journalists into his home, his abundant media appearances began to seem less genuine, with viewers often noting a smirk on his face. Lynsey's parents considered their son-in-law to be involved in their daughter's disappearance, and detectives also viewed him as the prime suspect. Yet, the lack of direct evidence tied their hands. Searches were conducted not just at the couple's home, but throughout the area. After a provocative question during a televised interview, the antagonist became even more brazen, even declaring that the time would come when his wife's family would have to apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mr. Key sent a postcard to the lead investigator on the case. Attached to it was a pack of hair dye. Instead of a festive greeting, Mitchell wrote, "I hope this covers your gray and gives you a bit more confidence," mocking the detective and displaying his own arrogance. In the media, he had already played the victim of not only marital infidelity, but also of harsh treatment by authorities. To put this upstart in his place, the investigation team gave an interview. Without revealing all the details of the case, they hinted that the well-known family man was not who he claimed to be. Tarnished reputation. In February 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal. It became known that he had been forging his wife's signature to receive social benefits, serving as another indirect proof of his involvement in Lynsey's disappearance and presumed demise. The investigators wanted to latch onto a financial motive. However, the suspect's popularity worked in his favor. Many supporters emerged, arguing that as a single father, he had every right to financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring the charges they desired. Nevertheless, they managed to charge him with fraud. Mr. Quee was brought to court for the benefit fraud and was found guilty, sentenced to a month of community service. This time, Mitchell couldn't walk away unscathed. The forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared more than suspicious. The number of angry comments increased. Eventually, the man's patience snapped and he began lashing out, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. A new beginning. The case of Lynsey Key's disappearance might have remained unsolved had it not been for a clue discovered by chance. On June 1st, 2000, a park-goer noticed his dog acting strangely near the roller coaster at a city amusement park. The animal uncovered human remains. Specialists were called to the scene, and the remains were sent for forensic examination, which revealed that they were parts of a female torso. Genetic testing confirmed they belonged to Lynsey Key, who had been missing for a long time. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lynsey had been the victim of a brutal crime. The focus now was to find the perpetrator. On June 7th, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. The detectives were determined, and after more than 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down under the pressure and confessed. Dismemberment murder. On December 15th, 1998, after meeting with her sister, Lynsey informed her husband that she wanted a divorce. This time, she was resolute. According to Key, this news infuriated him, leading him to attack and strangle her. The incident occurred in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, stuffing the gap under the door to mask any odors. Realizing he couldn't dispose of the body alone, he enlisted the help of his brother Elliot, a butcher who he thought could assist. Elliot was initially hesitant, but was eventually persuaded by Mitchell. While the children played in the next room, they dismembered Lynsey's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, the murderer expressed no remorse or empathy. Instead, he seemed proud of his actions, stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led them to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs. Sadly, her head and one hand were never recovered. The forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lynsey's. There was no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The final judgment. The trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001. The court proceedings were swift and straightforward. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. The court-appointed psychiatrist noted that the defendant showed all the signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lynsey's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. Just 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Wilson family. One of Lynsey's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. In his farewell note, he wrote that he saw no point in continuing in such a cruel world and wished to reunite with his sister. As of 2017, Mitchell Key has been eligible for parole. However, as of January 2023, his lawyers have been denied 3 times. The Wilsons, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released. Consequently, they have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. As long as the voices of the victim's family are considered, the criminal will continue to serve his sentence. Regardless, no punishment can bring Lynsey back. In an interview, Mr. Wilson mentioned hearing rumors that his former relative had attempted to end his life. He added that he sincerely hopes the murderer will try again and succeed this time. Experience shows that most women with domestic Stockholm syndrome try to adapt to their abusers throughout their lives. Even when their families come to their aid, they continue to act against their own best interests. In such cases, only deep self-reflection and psychotherapy can help. If the victim does not come to realize the recklessness of their actions, the end of the relationship will be dire. Today, we will visit Dallas, a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and southern charm. It is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. There are many historic districts, such as the West End with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the epicenter of Dallas chic. Living here itself offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance, has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2nd, 2015, at 07:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked, and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashem Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced and her mother married Bruce Jamieson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Pleasant Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, she moved to Dallas where she began working at Smilezona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christy and faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery, as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. One bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. The footage shows a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulling into the parking lot at 07:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Kendra returns home and drives into the same garage. A few minutes later, a man approaches her, shoots her, and runs to the side, after which he jumps in and black Jeep on the move. The videos were of poor quality and the crime scene itself was not visible on them. It was impossible to identify the assailants, but the vehicle was put on a wanted list. It was decided to place the camera footage, images of the Jeep and the driver in the media. The authorities appealed to the public for help, and it helped. Police were contacted by a man named Jose Luis Ortiz. He reported that the car in the footage belonged to him. But Jose wasn't involved in the shooting and he wasn't driving it. When questioned, Jose explained that on the morning of September 2nd, he was approached by two of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez. They asked Jose to repair their car and, in return, to lend them his Jeep until the evening. The man agreed. He also said that later that evening, Brenda called Jose to a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Crystal Cortez, later that evening, drove the Jeep to Jose's house, so the man was quite surprised when his Jeep made the news. When Jose saw his Jeep on the TV program, he asked Brenda about it. She first said that it was a different Jeep on the screen. Then Brenda explained that Crystal had been traveling somewhere on her business and she didn't know about it. Brenda Delgado suggested that Jose not tell anyone anything and to simply repaint the Jeep. She was willing to pay to paint the Jeep. Jose was awaiting a decision on his U.S. citizenship and did not want any trouble with the police. He realized that Brenda had set him up. So Jose went to the police again and testified again. So the police tracked all the movements of the Jeep that day and found the two young women whose names Jose had given them. Brenda Delgado was the first person investigators called in for questioning. The woman told police that she never knew Kendra Hatcher and had never seen her before. When asked where she was on September 2nd at 07:42 p.m., Brenda stated her alibi because she was at Chili's restaurant with Jose. Brenda even provided receipts for the dinner. But how often, and more importantly, what do you keep dinner receipts for? So gradually, assembled in minute detail, the truth that the participants in the crime tried to hide was revealed. The central figure in the investigation was Brenda Delgado. She was born into a fairly simple family, Luis and Maria Delgado, who immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father was a factory worker. They found a home in a low-income neighborhood in southeast Dallas. It was then that Luis found a job in construction, and his wife worked at the U.S. Post Office cleaning houses. Brenda was their second child and their only girl. Not only was she an excellent student who was loved by her teachers, but she also worked part-time at a flower store and as a waitress. Brenda was very ambitious and dreamed of going to medical school someday. But the sad reality was that her parents couldn't afford the expensive tuition. So after graduating from Skyline High School in 2000, she continued to live with her parents, only dreaming of an affluent and beautiful life. On the way to her goal, Brenda worked hard. She was a dental assistant, and alongside that, she worked at a day spa in North Park Center where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, Brenda met Ricardo Paniagua and fell in love with him. Their first date was at a Jennifer Lopez concert and was like her dream date. In November 2012, 3 months after they met, Brenda moved in with Ricardo at his home in Fitzhugh Urban Flats. The man was also charmed by Brenda so much that he even met her parents. In 2013, she uploaded a post in honor of his birthday on Facebook where she wrote words of congratulations. "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know. Ricky, together we have shared so much happiness. You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart and can't imagine life without you." Brenda then found out she was pregnant, but at Ricardo's insistence, she terminated the pregnancy, which left her heartbroken. A little recovered from the decision, Brenda decides to devote herself to her career and her beloved Ricky. In the fall of the same year, she enrolled in Sanford. At first glance, it seemed that Brenda had gotten over the emotional blow of the breakup. However, this was not the case. Brenda's painful dependence on Ricardo only gained momentum. And when Ricky posted a joint photo on social media with his new lover Kendra, who looked like a photo model, Brenda was up to something terrible. Many who knew her testified that Brenda dreamed of getting rid of Kendra. After obtaining information about Brenda and her personal life, investigators were able to surmise that the offended woman had a motive to get rid of her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend. They dated intermittently from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky and Kendra met. Ricardo was confident that he and Brenda remained friends and saw no problems between Brenda and Kendra. After all, he had been on dates with other women before meeting Kendra. And why would it be meeting Kendra that would turn Brenda's mind? However, the picture of the reconstructed events confirmed how insidious and cruel an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado thought she had devised the perfect plan to win back her former lover and rid him of the superfluous figure, Kendra Hatcher. At first, she established communication with Ricardo, pretending to be his best friend, provided all kinds of support, was interested in how he and Kendra are progressing in their relationship. Secretly, she knew everything about their plans for the future, and Ricardo believed that this is a sincere interest. But it's a shame that men know women so poorly and sometimes blindly trust them. After Ricardo learned that Kendra had died, he shared his grief with Brenda via text message, and she supported her friend in every way possible and offered to do anything for him. Ricky had no way of guessing his ex's true motives. As it turned out, Brenda had been playing her own game for months. She had opened Ricardo's mail and knew about all his plans with Kendra, even where and when they had booked tickets. All of this was infuriating to Brenda. She longed to be rid of Kendra Hatcher, truly believing that she had taken her place. Brenda transferred Ricardo's account to her phone and kept tabs on him. Following Ricky and Kendra practically became her raison d'etre. Brenda became completely dependent on the stalking. She quit her job and devoted all her time to realizing her goals. Over time, a cruel and terrifying plan was born in Brenda's mind: to kill the hated Kendra and take her place beside her lover. For its realization, Brenda addressed to many of her acquaintances with an offer for money to harm Kendra Hatcher. Thus, through mutual acquaintances, she found a single-mother 21-year-old Crystal Cortez, who, because of the big financial problems, just for $500 was ready to help her. At Brenda's behest, Crystal found the perpetrator, a man named Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Crystal handed Christopher $500 from Brenda, as well as 2 types of illegal substances. Several 2 women followed Kendra to learn her habits and daily schedule, to further select the location and time of the crime. On September 2, 2015, they took Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher Love waited for Kendra in the parking lot. They did not pursue her on her way home from work because they were afraid of falling behind her in traffic. In the evening, the criminals completed their devious plan and were rewarded for a job well done. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were apprehended. The suspects denied their guilt and their presence at the scene of the crime. However, the situation changed when Love was found to have the gun that killed Kendra in the side compartment of the car. Crystal, on the other hand, was nervous and constantly confused in her testimony, telling different stories about the reasons for the appearance of the SUV in different parts of the city. So, at the first interrogation, Crystal admitted that she was the woman who was driving in the parking lot. but she arrived there at the will of an armed carjacker who got into the SUV and forced her into the parking lot that evening. She, wishing to remain innocent, gave false testimony, saying that her son was in the car with her. But this information was later not confirmed because no child was recorded on the cameras. As the interrogation continued and more evidence became available, Crystal changed her testimony and wanted to make a deal with the investigation. She agreed to testify and testify against Brenda in exchange for less time. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead and the crime was her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting with Brenda, they began planning the crime. The police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricardo was over. She was obsessed and desperate to win him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy to be his loyal friend, but her life began to fall apart. She began to resent Kendra, believing that she had taken her place. According to Crystal, it was at this point that Brenda decided that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. The perfect crime plan emerged in Brenda Delgado's mind. In testimony, Crystal detailed how Brenda devised the perfect crime. Enlisting each other's support, Brenda and Crystal began to formulate a plan to kill Kendra. They met many times and developed many plans. The original plan was to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then get rid of her. But to avoid being under suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around the scraggliest neighborhoods and asked a few people if they could help. That's how they met Christopher Love. He agreed to help and took an active part in deciding the modus operandi of the crime. The trio unanimously decided that the best way to kill was to shoot him because it was quick. While cooperating, Crystal revealed that the date of September 2nd was not chosen at random. Brenda knew that Kendra and Ricardo were planning a trip to Mexico, so it was decided to get rid of the woman before the happy vacation. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the crime to look like a botched robbery. Next, the criminals chose the location of the massacre. For days, they desperately tracked Kendra's movements and recorded her minute by minute to make sure nothing changed on the appointed day. After work, they traced her route home and figured out how to discreetly enter the apartment complex's secure parking garage. On September 1st, 2015, they made a final check. On the day of the crime, early in the morning, Brenda and Crystal picked up the Jeep from Jose, then picked up Christopher along the way. Brenda was dropped off at the library in Carrollton so she would have an alibi, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex. They waited across the street for about 30 minutes, then drove to Kendra's place of employment. After waiting for their victim, they followed her but lost her in traffic, however. They returned to the house first and waited there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves, approached Kendra with a gun, and shot her when she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she did not actually see the shooting but heard it. Crystal then drove Christopher home, picked up her son from his grandmother on the way, and later met Brenda at Jose's house where she handed him the Jeep. Thus, Brenda's dream came true. She was rid of her hated rival, and all she had to do was wait for her beloved Ricardo's message. Brenda was happy that she had managed to pull off the perfect crime. Crystal's candid confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about Brenda Delgado's guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. But when police officers arrived with the warrant, she was no longer at home. Having dual citizenship, Brenda Delgado fled to Mexico. After fleeing, Brenda's involvement in a contract killing became apparent, and she was put on a wanted list. On April 6, 2016, the FBI placed her on the list of most wanted fugitives. assigning a reward of $100,000 for information about her. So Brenda Delgado became the only woman on the list at the time and the 9th woman on the list ever. But just 2 days later, in Torreon, Coahuila, she was apprehended by Mexican authorities and extradited to the United States on October 6th. Mexico agreed to extradite Brenda, but only on the grounds that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Brenda was extradited to Texas, and she was brought to trial. Hearings in the case began in 2017. The grief-stricken relatives of Kendra and Ricardo did not hesitate to express themselves during the court appearance. The oil was added to the fire by witnesses who confirmed Brenda's intentions and her dangerous obsession with her former lover. Brenda's cousin, Moses Martinez, spoke in court about his sister's depression after the end of her and Ricky's relationship. He also revealed that Brenda offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He refused to do so. Brenda's friend, Jennifer Escobar, testified at trial that Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo and read all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer revealed that Brenda had asked her to help eliminate the hated Kendra Hatcher too. She also told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something lethal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. For her help, Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car, and illegal drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then refused. It is quite strange that adults, having been offered the suggestion to harm or kill someone, contemplated doing so, and none of them went to the police to report a threat to a person's life or health. The court heard evidence about obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. So the court found that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, and she wanted only one thing: to get back to Ricky. The court received corroboration that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda became increasingly obsessed. As evidence of Brenda's involvement, an ATM withdrawal receipt in the amount of $500, which she subsequently gave to Crystal for doing the work, was presented at the hearing. Christopher Love received a cash payment in the amount of $600. The cell phone data provided also indicated that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together prior to the crime. More than 99 calls were recorded between Brenda and Crystal between August 22 and September 4th, proving their constant communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. The defendant's attorney tried to shift much of the blame to the perpetrators, but it didn't work. The defense argued that Brenda was not at the scene of the crime. She had an alibi and receipts confirming her presence at the restaurant at the time of the crime. Brenda herself did not plead guilty, but the jury thought otherwise. It took them only 30 minutes to find Brenda Delgado guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Christopher Love, the direct perpetrator of the crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death via injection. Crystal Cortez, in exchange for cooperating with the investigation and pleading guilty, received a sentence of 35 years in prison with parole eligibility. The family of Kendra Hatcher was satisfied with the court's decision and silently withdrew from the courtroom after the verdict. The Delgado family did not believe to the last that their Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving daughter and woman, healthy and with good family and Christian values. I hope this cautionary tale of female perfidy and mentally unhealthy obsessive love will leave a mark on every woman's soul and serve as a cautionary tale in new love relationships, for no man is worth a human life. Take care of yourself and be careful. Beautiful, rich, famous, and successful women are sometimes very unhappy in their personal lives. Just think of the story of the Turkish arabesque performer Belgin Sarılmışır, known under the pseudonym Bergen. The most famous woman in Turkey, famous all over the world, was tortured by her husband for many years. He beat her, disfigured her face with acid, and finally shot her. Our heroine today is Ecuadorian performer, television actress, music producer, and lingerie designer Edith Rosario Barmeo Cisneros, better known as Sharon La Hechicera, or simply Sharon. With her own hard work, perseverance, and talent, she has reached heights that one could only dream of, becoming one of the top stars of Ecuador and Latin America in general. Sharon dreamed of simple female happiness, family comfort, and a quiet harbor where she could return every evening and just be herself. But the man she loved, her husband and the father of her child, saw in her only an inexhaustible source of finances for his trouble-free and carefree life. It was this man who eventually became the culprit of the death of the nation's favorite in 2015. But despite the wide publicity, the final point in this high-profile case has not been put to this day. Sharon La Hechicera, biography, early years. The future star was born in 1974, March 28th, in the large metropolis of Santiago de Guayaquil, located on the Guayas River in the province of Ecuador. The full name given to the girl at birth sounds like Edith Rosario Barmeo Cisneros. She grew up in a simple and rather modest family, where in addition to her, there were 2 other children. Soon after the birth of her daughter, the whole family moved to the city of Duran, where the future queen of technocumbia spent her childhood and youth. Edith, from an early age, was a bright, active, and very artistic girl. At home, she was affectionately called Charo, or Charito, and it was this nickname later became part of her stage name. As a child, Edith was a big fan of the popular American comedy television series Bewitched, another name, My Wife Bewitched Me. Her idol and object of imitation was the main star of this show, the cult actress Elizabeth Montgomery. Then, the same girl began to call herself Charo Enchantress and dreamed of repeating the success of her favorite actress. From an early age, she became interested in music and loved to sing. She had a good musical ear and not bad vocal data, but to call them outstanding was difficult. Nevertheless, the girl conquered everyone with her natural charisma, artistry, and the ability to reincarnate. At the age of 8, she managed to win at the City Children's Festival, performing compositions Fox in Caico, as well as Los Angeles. By the time she graduated from school, she had already won several awards at city and regional music competitions. She dreamed of becoming a famous singer and conquer the big stage, but her parents were skeptical of these dreams. They believed that the heiress is not talented enough to become a star, and since their family has no connections in show business, the career of a performer is not worth dreaming about. Edith, listening to the advice of her family, decided to go to university, choosing a more practical and down-to-earth profession as a public relations specialist at the State University of Guayaquil at the Faculty of Communication Sciences. But her dream of becoming a singer did not go anywhere. Edith believed that everything has its time, and she should wait a little to choose the most appropriate moment. Path to fame. While studying at university, Edith took on any part-time job and tried herself as an assistant teacher in a kindergarten, a seller of sweets in Morocco, a traditional Ecuadorian drink, as well as a dancer in the local creative team, performing at the warm-up of visiting popular artists and musical groups. But all this was only to save money, which she later used to record her debut music album, Braveheart, which was released in 1998. In 2005, the singer released her 3rd studio album and received the prestigious award as the first solo techno-cumbia artist in the country to top the music charts. In 2010, she released her 4th album entitled Poco a Poco, and 2 years later, her 5th album was released, which unfortunately became the last one in her life and career. From the early 2000s until her tragic death in 2015, Sharon was the author, host, and co-host of many entertainment programs and TV shows on TV channels in Ecuador and other Latin American countries. She has been active in television series and has also worked as a public relations specialist for Canalo TV. In addition to a successful career on the music scene and television, Edith also decided to try herself as a fashion designer, creating seductive lingerie by her own sketches. And in this case, she also waited for success, and the brand she created quickly gained popularity among women almost all over America. For whatever business did not take Sharon, she everywhere succeeded, achieving great heights and recognition. Personal life of the performer. Despite the dizzying success on stage, television, and fashion business, the personal life of one of the main stars of Ecuador was not so rosy. She did not like to touch on this topic in conversations with the press, and in every way avoided such questions from journalists. However, Sharon La Hexera was constantly in the crosshairs of numerous photo and video cameras, so to hide anything from prying eyes was simply impossible. It is known that in the mid-90s, the aspiring performer was romantically involved with an entrepreneur and music producer named Eduardo Gray. For several years, the couple was officially engaged, but the wedding never came to the wedding, although Edith gave birth to a daughter from her lover. She named her heiress Samantha. The daughter inherited the entrepreneurial vein and artistry of her mother, also becoming quite a famous performer and actress. But to surpass her mother, she failed, despite all the efforts and available connections. Soon after parting with Eduardo, Sharon spun a new romance. This time her chosen one was a little-known television operator, with whom she met while working on one of the telenovelas. Their relationship developed rapidly, and after a short engagement, the couple played a modest wedding, trying to hide this event from others. But the news quickly became public, and the marriage itself lasted a short time. About the reasons for the sudden divorce of the performer preferred to keep silent. Later on, the artist had romantic relationships with a famous impresario named Pedro Francisco, then with a young dancer from the show ballet who performed with her on stage, as well as with some of her star colleagues. Unfortunately, none of these romances did not have a serious continuation, and Sharon broke up with her boyfriends for various reasons. The performer herself did not want to comment on the events that took place in her personal life. She raised a daughter, engaged in career, but still hoped that one day in her life there will be a worthy, loving man. Relationship with Giovanni Lopez. In 2009, the performer met a young man named Giovanni Lopez, who was more than 10 years younger than her. He was also a native of Ecuador, but as a child, together with his parents, emigrated to the United States. The family settled in New York City, where virtually all of Giovanni's childhood and adolescence took place. They first met during a large tour of the singer in the United States, but at that time their communication was limited to work, and Lopez himself helped with the organization of Sharon's performance. But probably, even then, these two have already penetrated some sympathy for each other. In addition, it turned out that the young man was a longtime fan of the Queen of Technocumbia, and he was honored to have the opportunity to work with her personally. A year later, Giovanni decided to return to his native Ecuador. He brought with him the designs he had developed for artists, one of which he created specifically for Sharon. So began their collaboration, and almost immediately a stormy romance broke out between them. At the time of the beginning of this relationship, the performer was already 36 years old, and Giovanni was barely 24 years old. However, the 12-year age difference did not embarrass them at all, and the couple did not care what people around them would think about it and how they will write about them in the press. Almost immediately, the lovers moved in together, deciding to live together. However, it should be noted that the parents and daughter of the performer treated her new chosen one very cautiously. Giovanni immediately they did not like it, and they decided that the young man twisted romance with the star solely for his own selfish purposes, and in fact did not love her at all, but only wanted to use. Sharon listened to the warnings of loved ones did not, because she believed that met the main man in his life, with whom they would live many happy years. Soon the couple married, and the couple began to think about the birth of a common heir. However, here they faced a problem, because the performer could not get pregnant. As a result, she decided to in vitro fertilization, and in May 2012, 38-year-old celebrity gave birth to a boy, who was named Brian Giovanni Lopez, the abusive relationship. Giovanni only at first tried to be a caring and loving man on whom you can rely in everything. However, as soon as the couple concluded marriage and the performer became pregnant, the behavior of the young husband began to change rapidly, and he himself literally turned into a domestic tyrant. He no longer sought to earn money independently, and he was quite satisfied with the position of an Alphonse. He willingly spent his wife's money for his own needs, entertainment, expensive clothes, and care for his appearance. In addition, Lopez began to abuse alcoholic beverages and less often appeared at home, preferring to spend time with friends and mistresses. To all this, Giovanni began to openly insult his wife, pointing to her age and fading beauty. According to some reports, because of his offensive statements and remarks, Sharon decided to do a number of plastic surgeries to preserve her youth and look like her husband. In particular, the performer enlarged her breasts, did a lift, and several cosmetic manipulations, but all her efforts were in vain and did not help to return to the family peace and harmony. Queen of Technocumbia continued to work actively, starred in TV series, posted entertainment shows, as well as preparing material for the recording of a new album. She tried to smile in public and claimed that she was finally happy in her personal life. However, only people close to her knew about how things were really going in her family. In early 2014, when little Brian was not yet 2 years old, the artist made the first serious attempt to break off the relationship with Giovanni. But he said that he would agree to give a divorce only if Sharon will give him half of his property and funds in her bank accounts, so that he, after the separation, could continue to lead an idle and carefree lifestyle to which he was used to. Sharon could not agree to these conditions, and so began to consult with lawyers how to dissolve the marriage, but at the same time, to keep the property and get full custody of their joint young son. By the end of the year, family life became simply unbearable, but the couple continued in public to play the role of happy spouses. One last family trip. On the eve of the New Year 2015, the performer gave a number of festive concerts and also starred together with her star colleagues in several dedicated Christmas and New Year's events. After that, exhausted by work, the young woman decided to arrange a small vacation and go with friends, husband, and son to the warm coast to relax a little, try to gather her thoughts, and decide what to do next. On the evening of January 3rd, 2015, the whole company decided to make the return trip. Since the journey was going to be long and they were traveling by car, the friends decided to follow each other and be in constant contact in case someone needed help. They decided to coordinate all the stops on the way in advance. Sharon had to drive the car that evening because her husband had been drinking alcoholic beverages all day. After a few hours, the company made a stop at a gas station and decided to have dinner there in a roadside cafe. During the meal, the singer and her young husband had a big fight because Giovanni again ordered a drink, although earlier he promised that he would not drink and get behind the wheel, giving Sharon the opportunity to rest and give time to the child. The couple argued for about half an hour and could not agree on who would drive the car. In the end, their friends could not stand it and asked if they could continue on their way. The singer said that she did not want to delay them because of her family problems, so they could go on, and he and Giovanni would have to stay a little longer. The friends reluctantly agreed, and after another half hour headed to their car, leaving the couple at a roadside cafe. They had no idea that they would never see Sharon alive again. Strange accident. On January 4th, around 2:30 in the morning, the friends received a phone call from an agitated Giovanni asking them to come back because there had been an accident and Sharon might be dead. His words were a real shock because he did not specify details and it was completely unclear what had happened on the night road. By the time they returned, emergency services were already on the scene, trying to help the victim and reconstruct the picture of events. According to Giovanni, on the highway Ruta del Spondylus, near the Ecuadorian province of Santa Elena, at about 1:15 a.m., his wife got out of the car to calm her crying son and change his diaper. At that moment, another car crashed into her at a great speed. This car, without even stopping, sped away, leaving the scene of the accident. The young woman was thrown a few dozen meters to the side of the road from the impact. When the ambulance arrived, she was still alive. She was even taken to the hospital, but despite the best efforts of the doctors, Sharon soon died of massive injuries and internal bleeding. Giovanni was still drunk and confused in his testimony, and his story sounded rather strange and not quite logical. The police therefore decided to detain him until morning to question him in detail when he had sobered up. Lopez confirmed the words of friends that he and his wife quarreled all evening and admitted that, contrary to the promises and prohibitions of his wife, defiantly drank alcohol in order not to drive and piss off Sharon. Giovanni's testimony. He did not see the license plate number of the car that hit his wife. He did not even remember the make, and only said that the car was white. There were no CCTV cameras on that stretch of road. No witnesses could be found, and the accident itself looked suspicious because Sharon did not even turn to the side of the road before leaving the cabin and did not make sure of safety. Although on a straight deserted road, any vehicle can be seen and heard from afar, even at night. The longer the police tried to correlate all the facts with Lopez's story, the more what had happened resembled not an accident, but a premeditated murder. Giovanni was confused about the timing and chronology of events, could not remember details, but most interestingly, he could not explain why their car was turned in the opposite direction to the route they were traveling. After another interrogation, the husband of the dead singer was arrested as the main suspect in the case of her death. The autopsy results and Sharon's funeral. The autopsy revealed that the deceased woman's body had numerous injuries typical of a victim of a traffic accident. However, experts also found a clear and fairly deep mark on Sharon's chest that could have been left by a seatbelt. This fact raised even more questions and suspicions. Samantha, who spent New Year's holidays in the company of her boyfriend, learned about the tragedy from singer Sonia Ramos, a close friend and colleague of her mother. The girl could not believe that all this is really happening. She called her father, Eduardo Gray, and asked him to come to her as soon as possible so that they went to Sharon's home together and began preparations for the funeral. After making all the preliminary arrangements, the body of the celebrity was taken to the Coliseum Cerrado Voltaire Paladines Polo in the province of Guayaquil. To say goodbye to one of the brightest stars of Ecuador came thousands of her friends, colleagues, and fans. Also, this sad event was covered in all leading publications of the country, and on television was even announced a one-day mourning. Grief-stricken Samantha sobbed on the shoulder of her father, and near were her grandmother, grandfather, and uncle and aunt. All members of the deceased celebrity's family refused to comment in any way on what had happened. None of them accused Giovanni of what happened directly, but all of them showed their negative attitude towards him. An investigation and a surprise court decision. The case was one of the most high-profile in Ecuador's history. It was widely covered in the press and jeopardized the reputation of the country's judicial system. The initial verdict literally shocked relatives and fans of the celebrity, and the revision of the case was delayed so much that the final point in this matter has not been put to this day. So, the white car, which presumably hit the artist, was found a few days later. The car had characteristic damage which, as experts have established, could be obtained as a result of an accident if you hit a person at high speed. The owner of the vehicle was a young woman named Haltiana Chavez, who categorically denied her involvement in the accident. However, the prosecutor's office opened 2 criminal cases at once: negligent homicide against Haltiana and premeditated murder against Giovanni. Lopez's story sounded extremely unconvincing. He was confused and contradicted himself, then recognized the car and even claimed to have seen the driver, then again doubted his own words, referring to alcohol intoxication. In parallel, the daughter and parents of the deceased also filed a statement, blaming the singer's husband for the incident. In their opinion, he never loved Sharon and had a motive for the murder in order to seize her money and get custody of the child. Samantha noted that her mother, shortly before the tragedy, consulted with lawyers about the dissolution of the marriage. Samantha also added that her little brother, who was the only witness to the incident, cries all the time and repeats, "Daddy is bad." However, they did not involve the child as a witness in order not to cause the boy even more psychological trauma. After a detailed reconstruction of the events of that evening, Tatiana was ruled out as a suspect. By comparing the times and places where Tatiana had been seen before and after the accident, it was determined that she could not have been physically near the accident site at that time, and her car had been damaged in another accident. The other car was soon found to be the one that was found to have hit Sharon. The owner, Luis Correo, who had been driving that night, was arrested. By that time, he had already managed to replace the broken headlight and repair other body damage. But experts were able to establish that at the scene of the accident were found shards of glass from his car. Luis himself admitted to everything and said that Sharon literally fell under the wheels of his car, and he was so scared of what happened that he just drove away. In June 2015, Giovanni was found guilty of manslaughter of his wife. Experts proved that the injury on the woman's chest from the seat belt was caused by her trying to protect herself before her husband pushed her out of the car, right under the wheels of another car. However, the court verdict shocked Sharon's relatives and fans because her killer was only given 3 years. A retrial and attempts to appeal the new verdict. Such a lenient sentence caused a storm of excitement in the media and provoked a lot of protests across the country. People demanded fair punishment for the murderer of the star, a national favorite. Already in July of the same year, the judges involved in the case were suspended and subsequently dismissed. The new judicial staff canceled the previous verdict, arguing that a number of administrative and bureaucratic mistakes had been made. All attempts by the defense lawyers to challenge the reversal of the verdict were unsuccessful. Luis Correo was cleared of responsibility for the singer's death, but he was still charged with fleeing the scene and attempting to conceal evidence. But Giovanni Lopez was brought to every court session under heavy security in order to avoid attacks on him fans of Sharon. In October 2015, the husband of the singer was found guilty of her death and sentenced to 26 years in prison. The court also took into account the evidence provided by Samantha evidence of Giovanni's cruel treatment of her mother, as well as the fact that he blackmailed his wife, demanding from her a fabulous sum for consent to divorce. A few months later, 2 appeals were filed at once. The prosecution demanded to increase the term to the maximum, 35 years, and the lawyers insisted on the illegality of the new sentence. However, both complaints were rejected. In 2021, Lopez again tried to challenge the court's decision. In addition, he stated that he was subjected to ill treatment in prison and his rights were grossly violated. The prisoner even went on a hunger strike to pressure the court to release him. He argued that he was wrongfully convicted and the main perpetrator of the tragedy, Luis Correo, remained free. In 2023, Giovanni, already with a new lawyer, appealed again, once again hoping to secure his release. It is worth noting that in this difficult case, the composition of the judges was again changed due to the revealed abuse of power. Therefore, Lopez's defense hopes not only to challenge the verdict, but also to seek compensation for the years spent in prison. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No. On the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher. The insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends and a young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique. And all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals, and in it, he was considered a strongman. a player who is able to break the opponent's ribs, only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed through his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room, "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing. The criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow, what was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched, lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved. Especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered, for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing?" "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another, less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play." "Tom really was suspicious that evening," said his acquaintance Laura. "During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered, already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Aunt Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer, doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him,
And for some reason, he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage, and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly. But he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece, that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with two women who were also playing poker that night.
In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then, when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the third and fourth time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you?" Or, "Haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go, but the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife, Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say, and for this work, he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife, and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping, but the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door, and when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck, but it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her, says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. and if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did.
After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who, in fact, served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. "If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you." Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. "And who killed her?" the detective asked. "I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer," Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination, and the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job, as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls, and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28, 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout.
He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, His lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there, and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kin. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. The case of Paula Ortega. In early 2023, the city of Sangolquí in Ecuador's Pichincha region was rocked by a tragic incident. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the community, but its motive, a mere $600 theft. Could the life of 37-year-old Paula Ortega Alcocer really be valued at just $600? Born in March 1986, Paula was the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figueroa Lara School and later attended the Polytechnic University, where she developed a keen interest in the hospitality industry. After her studies, Paula actively contributed to the growth of her family's business, which specialized in party goods manufacturing. The Ortega Alcocer family was well-to-do and renowned in Sangolquí and neighboring Ecuadorian towns. Paula's father, in his youth, began building a business supplying party goods across Ecuador. The venture became quite successful, enabling him to start his own production of balloons, piñatas, and other festive paraphernalia. This expansion led to the opening of several stores. The Alcocer family's party shops were located not only in Sangolquí, but also in Ecuador's capital, Quito. Each family member played a role in the development and maintenance of their enterprise. The father expanded the main production line, opening new workshops for balloons, garlands, caps, and various party items. Each of the 3 children managed a store, tailoring it to their vision. Paula's entrepreneurial spirit led her beyond just managing a store. She organized a party planning service within the company, which turned out to be a great success. It seemed Paula had found her calling, bringing joy to people, which made her truly happy. While the business ventures of the Ortega family flourished for a long time, unfortunately, Paula Ortega's personal life was not as successful. Despite her youthful and joyous demeanor, she faced significant hardships in her private life. Paula's first marriage to Carlos Pedro turned out to be unhappy. After the birth of their daughter, Carlos developed an alcohol addiction. He began disappearing from home and stealing money from Paula's store. His infidelity was the last straw, leading Paula to end the marriage and find herself alone with her daughter. This period was particularly challenging for Paula, as she lost hope in finding personal happiness. However, the psychological support of her family and her passion for her work helped her regain a sense of normalcy in her life. A decade later, Paula met Christian Diego. A tall, dark-haired, and handsome man, Christian was 4 years younger than Paula. Having lost faith in finding a worthy partner, Paula was cautious with the persistent young suitor. Christian proved to be calm and reliable, quickly bonding with Paula's daughter, which greatly impressed Paula. After 2 years of relationship, her heart warmed to him, leading to a beautiful wedding ceremony. Christian embraced Paula's daughter as his own, and they soon welcomed another daughter, Maria. Christian and Paula spent 5 years together, with Christian fully integrating into Paula's father's company. He was entrusted with finding locations for new stores, which often kept him away from home. Coming from a modest working-class family, Christian had always dreamed of owning a large business. Unfortunately, some people can conceal their dark sides so well that one might live for years alongside ruthless criminals without suspecting a thing. However, the truth eventually comes to light when evil erupts in the most unexpected ways. Paula Ortega and her husband, Christian, appeared to be the epitome of a happy, successful couple to their family, friends, and neighbors. However, this perception was only surface deep. In 2000, Paula's father passed away after a long illness. His death not only devastated the family, but also turned their business upside down. Christian, driven by a desire for power and the wealth it brought, eagerly sought to take Paula's father's place in the business. However, his lack of skill led to one failed deal after another. As a result, Christian began to vent his frustration on his family. Initially in secret, but later openly, he began to abandon his family, indulging in a life of debauchery. Women and alcohol became his escape into a world of pleasure and recklessness. With Paula's father no longer there to restrain him, Christian's true nature began to surface. Having already experienced a traumatic marriage, Paula refused to endure this behavior again. The couple's home became a battleground of endless scandals, revealing Christian's true nature as an ambitious egotist, craving only power and unquestioned obedience. After a particularly nasty argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce, fearing her husband's reaction. The news of this drastically changed Christian's behavior. Unwilling to lose his place in the successful family, he stopped his outrageous conduct and appeared to transform for the better. He expressed remorse, claiming to be caught up in a whirlwind of confusion, and professed his love and value for his family. His eloquence persuaded Paula. Not wanting to be alone again, she gave him a second chance. In a gesture of reconciliation, Christian suggested organizing a romantic dinner at their home. Paula agreed. She sent their daughters to her parents' house and began preparing for the evening. Inside, she was aflutter with excitement. Deep down, she still dreamed of a happy, strong family and was doing everything she could to preserve it. The evening at the Ortega home was one of celebration and comfort. The living room was lit up with festive garlands, and the dining table was warmly illuminated by the yellow glow of candles. Christian uncorked a bottle of dry white wine while Paula served a hot meal. The night could have been genuinely reconciliatory, had it not been for a sudden proposal from Christian that disrupted the peace. Christian, a co-owner of the Alcozer company, revealed to his wife a significant misstep. In his pursuit to replace Paula's father and gain full control, he had made a costly mistake in an important tender, leading to substantial losses for the company. Now, the firm desperately needed a new investor, implying that a part of the company would officially change hands. Paula was adamantly against this, believing her father's business should remain a family affair. Despite Christian's persuasion, she stood her ground, infuriating him. He had already found an investor and was eager to complete the deal without complications. Their dinner, and by extension their relationship, soured. January 2nd, 2023, seemed like any other day. Paula took her younger daughter to the playroom before heading to her shop for work. She had a large order to prepare, involving assembling balloon fountains and party decorations for a themed event. During her lunch break, 2 men knocked on the shop's door. Although closed, Paula opened it, expecting a courier to pick up the balloon bouquets. The men, slim and dressed identically as if they were twins, startled her with their dark hoodies. They lingered, scanning the shop before splitting up. As Paula called out to them, stating the shop was closed for lunch, they cornered her against the wall. The tension of this silent scene was broken by a knock on the glass door. The men hastily exited the shop. A smiling young courier arrived, unwittingly rescuing Paula from the unknown assailants. Shaken, Paula handed over the package, closed the shop, and with trembling hands, called her mother. She was visibly frightened, a sentiment she expressed over the phone. Paula's mother suggested reporting the unsettling incident at her shop to the police, but Paula declined, attributing her reaction to mere fright since nothing harmful had actually occurred. She didn't reopen her shop that day, her thoughts consumed by Christian's actions and the identity and motives of the 2 mysterious men. Seeking solace, Paula decided to take a stroll through the city. She stopped at a nearby cafe for some coffee, walked through the park to breathe in the fresh air, and then visited her sister. Over cups of fragrant tea, they engaged in a heart-to-heart conversation. Overwhelmed by the day's shocking events, Paula confided in her sister not only about the scary encounter at her shop, but also about the difficulties in her marriage. She shared how Christian had drastically changed after her father's passing, indulging in alcohol and openly being unfaithful. Paula chose not to mention his proposal about merging the company with a new investor, as she habitually kept her personal struggles to herself. But that day, her emotions overpowered her pride and shame over tolerating such demeaning treatment. He's a peculiar being. My sister was lively, happy, cheerful, enterprising, hardworking, an extremely gentle and kind mother. She should have been receiving energy from him, Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, would later say. Paula spoke of her long-term life plans, her desire for her daughters to grow up and become professionals, and her intention to continue her business. She was selfless and tirelessly hardworking, Adriana recalled. After her emotional talk with her sister, Paula headed home. A phone call from Christian interrupted her. He was picking up their daughter from the playroom and would come to the shop to pick her up as well. His hurried speech was interspersed with children's voices. Paula didn't get a chance to tell him about the frightening incident at her shop, especially since she suspected him to be involved. Reluctantly, Paula returned to work, once again prioritizing her family's well-being over her own. She didn't have to wait long. Christian arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had wanted to go home, and he couldn't deny his little princess. He informed Paula that the girls were at home and eagerly waiting for hamburgers for dinner. In what has become a modern family tradition, Christian took Paula not to the nearest fast food joint, but to a restaurant courtyard at a shopping center, several blocks from their home. Parking the car beside a secluded wall and locking it securely, he left Paula inside to collect their order. Relaxing in the passenger seat after a taxing day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the impending danger. Shortly, she recognized two familiar figures near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. Recognizing them as the unexpected visitors from her shop, Paula tried to stay calm, trusting that the car was secure and Christian would return soon. Suddenly, the car's lights flashed and the door locks disengaged. In a panic, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms, but she was trapped with no escape. One intruder casually got into the driver's seat while the other joined him in the back, pinning Paula down even more. She felt something warm trickling down her arm before darkness enveloped her. Paula sustained 11 knife wounds to her neck and 2 to her face. After the brutal attack, the assailants fled the scene, leaving Paula alone and gravely injured. Christian returned just 7 minutes later to a horrific sight. The car's interior was drenched in blood. Frantically, he called emergency services, but struggled to clearly communicate the situation and give emergency coordinates. He then called Paula's mother to report the attack before driving to the hospital himself. Tragically, Paula succumbed to her injuries in the emergency room, passing away before receiving necessary medical attention. Christian, overwhelmed by grief and shock at the loss of his wife, reacted with loud cries and throwing chairs in the waiting room. The sudden violent end of Paula Ortega left a community in shock and a family in profound grief, raising questions about the motive and identity of the attackers. The initial theory of the prosecution was a violent end inflicted during a robbery. It was later discovered that $600 and a gold necklace were missing from Paula's purse. This began an investigation. The prosecution's theory was confirmed when footage from city cameras showed 2 unknown men who had visited Paula's store earlier that day in the vicinity. Both were in hoodies, making it impossible to create a clear image of their faces, and their vague descriptions provided no clarity. 2 months after the tragic event, Paula's family demanded justice, but the investigation was at a standstill. A turning point came when Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, gave testimony casting doubt on Christian's innocence. She informed the investigators about a conversation she had with Paula on the day of the incident. Adriana also mentioned that Christian regularly committed infidelity and domestic violence against Paula, who was contemplating divorce. This provided a perfect motive, as Christian, driven by ambition, could not afford to lose his wealth and status in the event of a divorce. The prosecution investigated this angle. During a search of their home, incriminating messages were found on Christian's phone, indicating multiple affairs and turbulent marital relations. A critical piece of evidence was documentation prepared for the transfer of the company to a private individual, which Paula had refused to sign. Following these revelations, the incident was investigated as a suspected homicide, as the prosecution continued to gather information implicating Christian Diego. New evidence emerged, unraveling the complex web of the couple's relationship. 2 weeks after the incident, we found out he transferred $2,000 to an unknown woman's account, said Adriana, Paula's sister, adding another layer of suspicion to the already convoluted case. The most shocking aspect, as claimed by relatives, was that Christian made a payment using Paula's account while she was dying from her injuries. Instead of immediately helping his gravely wounded wife, Christian seemingly bided his time. Investigations confirmed this information. The identity of the woman who received the transfer from Christian that day was established as 28-year-old Laura Castillo. Urgently summoned for questioning, she revealed that she had noticed her bank card missing a couple of days earlier, but didn't think much of it, as her brother often used her card. The electronic payment records showed a transfer of $2,000 from Christian on January 2nd at 20:05. However, Laura denied any acquaintance with Christian. Her solid alibi at the time of the incident absolved her of any involvement. She was released, and the investigation hit a dead end again. Days later, Laura returned to the police, stating her brother had returned the bank card, as she had suspected. She provided a full description of her brother's appearance, which matched one of the criminals caught on surveillance cameras near the car. In the chaos of fleeing the crime scene, one attacker forgot to pull up his hood. The identities of Byron and Mortines Castillo, two repeat offenders with a substantial criminal history, were established. The brothers were apprehended. But what could possibly link two seasoned criminals to a seemingly respectable and successful family man? Further investigation revealed that the attacks on Paula had been carried out repeatedly by the Castillo brothers. But why were these repeat offenders targeting this young woman? On December 8, 2022, Paula Ortega faced a harrowing incident at a gas station when her car was stolen. Distracted by a young man, his accomplice quickly jumped behind the wheel and sped off. Fortunately, her daughters weren't in the car that day. Surveillance footage identified the two familiar culprits. Coincidentally, on the day of the theft, Paula unknowingly came face to face with her future assailant. However, the car theft case took an unexpected turn when Christian intervened, claiming the thieves had contacted him. He met with them and retrieved all of Paula's personal belongings, including her wallet. This development cast further doubt on Christian's innocence. Seasoned investigators were puzzled by the widower's boldness in shielding the criminals. Surveillance cameras played a crucial role in identifying the carjackers. As Christian realized he was under suspicion, he concocted a new defense narrative involving extortion by two criminal brothers demanding a large sum of money. But before he could deploy his version of events, the police executed a swift interrogation strategy. Separating the suspects and suggesting one had confessed, they obtained a confession from Martin Castillo. He admitted that more than 2 months earlier, Christian had paid them $2,000 to murder his wife, promising another $2,000 after the deed. During a reenactment, Martin demonstrated how he inflicted 11 fatal knife wounds on the terrified woman. Realizing the crime was uncovered, he remorselessly divulged all details of their arrangement with Christian. Martin revealed that the car theft and the attack on Paula's shop were also parts of Christian's plan to pressure her. By chance, Paula lived a few hours longer than intended. On November 29, 2023, all 3 suspects appeared in court. The prosecution presented a comprehensive picture of the murder day, pieced together from various sources. Videos from surveillance cameras in the area where Christian parked the car, subjected to audio and video forensic analysis, unveiled a chilling, soul-freezing narrative. In chilling surveillance footage, Christian Diego is seen exiting his car and heading towards a shopping center elevator. Moments later, he remotely unlocks his car from half a block away, allowing 2 assailants to enter the vehicle and attack Paula. The prosecutor's report noted Christian's odd behavior post-attack, repeatedly looking back, approaching the car, pausing, returning, pacing back and forth, and making phone calls. Surprisingly, upon finding his wife bleeding profusely, he showed no shock or urgency to help her, instead driving her to a distant hospital. Christian's actions, meticulously reconstructed from surveillance videos, particularly in the first 4 minutes after Paula's attack, were cold and calculating. As she bled in the car but was still alive, Christian, standing nearby, callously transferred money to his accomplices for the assault. Paula's family lawyers urged the court to consider these videos as aggravating factors in the crime. The reconstructed sequence of events presented in court proves the crime was premeditated. Hours before the attack, around 1:30 p.m., 2 individuals entered Paula's store, dropped off nearby by Christian. This implies the crime was intended to occur earlier, during the lunchtime closure, when Paula was alone. Prosecutor Marlon Calderon highlighted inconsistencies. How did the assailants know the couple would be at the eatery if they weren't tailing them? Yet they arrived on time to commit the crime. Christian's actions, not fully raising the car window, unlocking the doors near the eatery, his 1,000 times pacing before aiding his wife, phone calls, and not seeking immediate medical attention at a nearby clinic are key evidence for charging him with orchestrating the femicide. Femicide, defined as the intentional murder of a woman simply because she is a woman, was a central theme in the trial of Christian and Paula Ortega's troubled relationship. Shockingly present in today's society, this hate crime was exemplified through Christian's younger age, which seemed to fuel his contempt and abuse towards Paula. Despite her success, Paula lived in a metaphorical golden cage, masking and enabling her husband's tyrannical behavior, allowing him to assert dominance. Years of silence culminated in Christian's sinister plot to seize control of Paula's thriving party empire and gain sole guardianship of their daughter, Maria. Testimonies from over 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, alongside thorough examination of internal and external family communications, revealed Christian's true motives and objectives. Without legal signing rights, he sought to coerce Paula into transferring her company shares. However, his plan failed. Christian didn't physically harm Paula but inflicted severe psychological abuse, artfully concealed under the guise of a perfect family life. According to the Prosecutor General's report, video evidence led to Christian's preventive isolation as the crime's orchestrator. This measure isn't an arrest but a strategy to neutralize a societal threat. Following this action, Christian planned to flee. In the high-profile case against Christian Diego, accused of orchestrating his wife's demise, his defense team worked tirelessly to portray him as a victim. However, they were unable to refute crucial evidence like surveillance footage and falsified company transfer documents. Desperate, the defense then attempted to depict the accused as suffering from a mental disorder, citing episodes of sudden rage. Multiple psychiatrists evaluated Christian, but he was declared competent. His defense counsel, realizing the gravity of the situation, advised Christian to flee the country, asking if his passport was ready and suggesting he buy a ticket to Panama for the next day. However, this plan to escape justice failed. Christian's search for Central American flight tickets raised alarm bells with the authorities. The prosecutor swiftly ordered an 8-hour detainment of Christian Diego, followed by charges and the disclosure of case details to a judge specializing in domestic violence cases. Pending trial, the suspect was held in preliminary detention, pursued as the alleged mastermind behind the heinous act that left 2 young children motherless and an entire family grieving an irreplaceable loss. The Ortega family demands justice for this atrocious crime, emphasizing the devastating impact on the children and their irreplaceable loss. In a case that gripped public attention, the jury concluded that Christian and his 2 accomplices were guilty of a meticulously planned, intentional act of extreme brutality. The unremorseful Christian and his associates were sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Rumiñahui expressed their solidarity with the tragic loss of Paula Alcocer. The institution extends its deepest sympathies to the family and friends affected by this incident. The unfortunate demise of this esteemed businesswoman, friend, mother, and wife, who contributed significantly to the canton's development and brought prosperity to those in her circle, is deeply mourned. Their statement read, Paula's case emerged as a prominent instance of violence against women, following the Latin American Association for Alternative Development's report of 332 fatalities due to gender-based violence in 2022.
An unequal marriage and a crime for millions. People who are madly in love with money but do not know how to earn it themselves can be extremely cunning and dangerous. They easily cross the boundaries of morality, ethics, and law. For them, there are no friends, relatives, or loved ones, and they are capable of any betrayal, even a crime, for money. Such was the case with a seemingly charming and sweet woman named Celeste. The case of Celeste and Stephen Beard in the early 2000s shocked the United States of America and was later widely covered in the media of other countries. The story began in a typical manner. An elderly millionaire decided to marry a young beauty who worked for him as a maid. Friends, relatives, and business partners advised Mr. Beard against this step, but he was blinded by love and genuinely believed that his feelings were mutual. Stephen was the fourth of 5 legal husbands of this cunning and greedy woman. She never loved him, but only saw him as a source of her own enrichment. In various ways, the wife forced the millionaire to change the conditions of their marriage contract so that, in case of his death, she would receive as much money and property as possible. To hasten her husband's demise while deflecting suspicion from herself, Celeste used a woman who was in love with her. Early years of Stephen Beard. Stephen Beard was born on August 11, 1924, in Dallas, Texas. He was the only child of a woman named Dolores, but never knew his biological father. He was always very close to his mother, who worked multiple jobs to provide everything necessary for her son. Stephen's childhood and youth coincided with the difficult times of the Great Depression and World War II. After finishing high school, the young man tried for some time to find a job in advertising, but soon realized that without education, it would be very difficult to get a good job, so he studied to become a marketer. However, he did not have time to apply his knowledge and practice, as he went to war, serving in the Navy until 1945. During the war years, Stephen gained an engineering specialty, but despite this, he could not find a decent job in peacetime. He managed to get a position as a sales consultant in a small shoe store in his hometown of Dallas, where he earned a very modest salary, barely enough for the essentials. Nevertheless, Stephen later called that period the happiest in his life, because he was young, full of strength, enthusiasm, and faith in a bright future. Most importantly, during his time working in the store, he met the main woman in his life, his wife, Alice Adams. The girl was 2 years younger than him, possessed striking looks, a slender figure, and was trying to build a career in the modeling business, but abandoned her ambitions to devote herself to her family. The young couple, deeply in love, got married in 1948, just a couple of months after meeting, and a year later, their eldest daughter was born. In 1950, Alice gave her husband a long-awaited son, and 3 years later, another boy was born. Their family was strong and loving, where everyone cared for and supported each other. From janitor to millionaire. In the early days of regular electronic television broadcasting, Stephen dreamed of working in the industry, but his path was challenging and filled with obstacles. In the late 1940s, he managed to get a job at one of the studios, but only as a janitor. However, the young man did not give up, continued searching, and soon luck smiled upon him. He was offered a chance to try his hand as a host of an entertainment program on a radio station, and he eagerly accepted the offer. After several years of hard work, Beard became the producer of a popular television program. His income rapidly increased, and he felt right at home in the field of mass communications and information. Stephen became an excellent specialist in advertising and entertainment content promotion, developing new ideas and brilliantly bringing them to life. He worked with many different people, made many useful connections, constantly improved himself, and strove to improve the world. By the mid-1950s, Stephen was successfully engaged not only in advertising and producing TV projects, but also invested the money he earned in real estate
and started selling cars. By the age of 40, Stephen had earned his first $1 million and had no plans to stop there. In 1974, at the age of 50, Beard managed to win a tender together with the television company he founded. The businessman, along with his wife and 3 children, moved to Austin, the capital of Texas, where they bought a luxurious mansion with a large pool. Their home was located in one of the most prestigious areas of the city, covering almost 5,000 square meters. The couple joined an elite local club, membership in which cost them over $50,000 a year, but by that time, such an amount was insignificant for them. The Beards achieved incredible heights, raised 3 children, gave them an excellent education, and now simply enjoyed life. Alice continued to take great care of her appearance, exercised, and despite her age and having 3 children, maintained a slender figure. Meanwhile, Stephen rapidly gained weight and refused to do anything about it. He joked that his physique matched his social status and income level. All his wife's attempts to get him to exercise and watch his diet were met with promises to consider her advice. By the early 1990s, Beard's fortune had exceeded $10 million. The businessman and his family had virtually everything money could buy. The couple acquired their own yacht, traveled extensively, doted on their grandchildren, and were incredibly happy. It seemed that this happiness would last forever, but suddenly, tragedy struck their home. Illness and death of Alice Beard. In early 1993, Alice sought medical help due to severe migraines that had been constantly tormenting her. A thorough examination revealed a cancerous tumor in her brain. Treatment began immediately. One of the best neurosurgeons operated on Mrs. Beard, and she was prescribed expensive medications that were hard to obtain. Her husband spared no expense on innovative therapy, which offered some hope for recovery. Alice's diagnosis was a shock to the entire family, but they supported her and believed in the best. It seemed that their love, care, and advanced treatment technologies yielded results, and after 6 months, she went into remission. In August of that year, they went on a cruise to relax, celebrate their 45th wedding anniversary, and the victory over the illness. It was a wonderful, romantic, but unfortunately, their last vacation together. By late September, the insidious disease returned with renewed vigor and began to progress rapidly. Neither the best specialists nor experimental therapy could help Alice. She passed away on October 13th, 1993, at the age of 68. For her family, it was an irreparable loss and a pain that nothing could alleviate. Period of depression and new love. After the passing of his beloved wife, Stephen fell into a deep depression. He lost interest in his business affairs, spent a lot of time at the bar of the upscale country club, sitting alone, drinking heavily, and just passing time to avoid returning to his empty, enormous house. By then, his children had long grown up and moved away, and his grandchildren only visited during holidays, leaving the millionaire in the mansion surrounded only by his numerous housekeepers, cooks, gardeners, and other staff. The man was visibly withering away. As a family man, he desperately needed a kindred spirit, care, and companionship. His relatives and friends were convinced that he needed a woman who would support him and be a source of comfort during such a difficult time. However, Stephen was not ready for a new relationship. At that moment, he couldn't even imagine loving someone else again. In early 1994, Beard met an attractive young woman named Celeste Martinez, who had started working as a waitress at the country club's restaurant a couple of weeks before their first meeting. She was a pretty, smiling blonde, very sociable, and able to attract attention. She was divorced and was fighting her ex-husband for custody of their twin daughters. Celeste was experiencing financial difficulties, had many debts, and told pitiful stories about her tough life. Stephen became a sympathetic listener and quickly grew fond of this girl. He genuinely felt sorry for her, wanted to help her out of her difficult situation, and offered her a job as a maid in his home, which she gladly accepted. Thus began a rather predictable romance between the elderly millionaire and the cunning beauty, who was almost 40 years younger than him.
Who is Celeste Beard? Celeste Mary Johnson, maiden name matching her fifth husband's surname, has carried several surnames over time: Bratcher, Wolf, Martinez, Johnson, but became globally notorious under the surname of her fourth husband, Stephen Beard. She was born on February 13, 1963, in Culver City, California. Nothing is known about her biological parents, as her mother abandoned her immediately after she was born. At 2 days old, she was adopted by Nancy and Edwin Johnson. The couple had spent many years unsuccessfully trying to have their own children, but Nancy had repeated miscarriages, which led to a nervous breakdown that later developed into prolonged depression and resulted in a mental disorder. In the late 1950s, the Johnsons adopted 2 boys. In 1963, they took in Celeste, and a year and a half later, they adopted another girl. Over the years, Nancy's mental condition worsened and became increasingly unstable. The couple frequently argued, and their adopted children were unwilling witnesses to these fights. Nancy sank deeper into depression, repeatedly attempted to end her life, and even wanted to harm the children. Many years later, Celeste recounted that her most frightening childhood memory was bath time when she and her sister were in the bathtub, and their mother suddenly pushed their heads underwater, holding them there for a while before letting go. Nancy claimed she was just rinsing their hair, but the sisters were convinced their mother had tried to drown them, but then reconsidered. After this incident, Nancy was admitted to a psychiatric clinic following another nervous breakdown, leaving Edwin to care for the 4 children. He tried to be a good father and take care of his charges, but in her teenage years, Celeste openly accused him of constant molestation and abuse, which she claimed began when she was only 11. However, her words were hard to trust, as this story repeatedly changed, gained different details, and later, the blonde even alleged that her older brothers also committed acts of intimate violence against her. Pathological liar. Soon, the Johnsons separated and began a court battle for custody of their adopted children. Nancy claimed her husband was an alcoholic and accused him of domestic violence. Edwin, on the other hand, argued that the children couldn't be left with their mother because she was dangerous, and due to her mental issues, could harm herself and them at any moment. Celeste didn't want to stay with either of her adoptive parents, but in court, she testified against her father, accusing him of molestation, aggression, assault, and even armed attack. According to her, when she was a child, Edwin struck her in the head with a knife, causing her to nearly bleed to death. When asked to show the scar, she initially said it was hidden by her hair, then forgot where exactly she had been hit. Eventually, she claimed the scar had disappeared with age. Celeste constantly fabricated stories about her past, portraying herself as a victim. She understood this was the easiest way to attract attention, elicit pity and sympathy from others, and get what she wanted. During her teenage years, Celeste was extremely temperamental, behaved aggressively and sometimes irrationally, leading her to be taken to a psychiatrist. She was never diagnosed, with the conclusion being that it was just a difficult adolescence compounded by an unhealthy family environment. Celeste went through several more foster families, but never settled anywhere. Thanks to her striking appearance and brazen behavior, Celeste was very popular with the opposite gender from a young age. She often skipped school, preferring to spend time with boys in bars or on the beach, and in high school she dropped out altogether. Marriage to Craig Bratcher and birth of twins. At 16, Celeste met a young man named Craig Bratcher, who was only a year and a half older than her. They quickly started living together, and less than a year later, Celeste became pregnant. In December 1980, the couple had a modest wedding, and soon after, their twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina, were born. The young parents were unprepared for family life, domestic responsibilities, and raising children. They constantly argued, and Celeste didn't want to change her lifestyle. She spent her time in bars and clubs, leaving the children with Craig. She repeatedly accused Craig of domestic violence, assault, and forcing intimacy, trying to portray herself as a victim, secure a divorce, and receive monthly payments from her ex-husband.
Celeste again accused her husband of abuse when he caught her in bed with a lover and threatened to end their lives. She managed to get Craig sent to jail for several months, although no one was actually harmed during that incident. The couple divorced in the spring of 1982. Celeste filed for child support and even obtained a restraining order against her ex-husband. However, she continued to regularly leave the children with him so they wouldn't interfere with her social life. New fleeting marriages. After the divorce, Celeste wandered from one rented room to another, living off alimony and welfare, stubbornly refusing to work. She constantly took men to court, accusing them of harassment and violence, hoping to get some compensation. Celeste had no interest in her children and simply gave them to a foster family to avoid having them interfere with her lifestyle. When her ex-husband found out, he was shocked. He managed to gain custody of the children and took them in. Soon after, Celeste convinced him to try living together again. He agreed, but the reunion was short-lived. A couple of months later, Celeste again accused him of violence and took him to court. Craig even agreed to take a lie detector test, which showed he was telling the truth. After the breakup, the parents split the children. Jennifer stayed with her father, while Christina went with her mother. In 1986, Celeste married for the second time to a serviceman named Harold Wolfe. But this marriage didn't last long. Despite Harold treating her and her daughter well, life with the unstable Celeste proved unbearable. She constantly argued, threatened to end her life, and even called Harold's superiors, complaining about him, nearly ruining his career. Almost immediately after the divorce, Celeste married again. Her third husband was a wealthy top manager named Jimmy Martinez. The couple bought a spacious house in Austin, but Celeste nearly bankrupted her new husband by spending his money recklessly. When he realized she had drained his accounts and put him in debt, he tried to talk to her, but she cut her wrist with scissors. After that incident, Celeste was sent for mandatory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. The therapy did her some good, and she calmed down a bit, but it didn't save her marriage to Jimmy. She also accused her third husband of domestic violence, but he managed to have all charges dropped. Immediately after that, he filed for divorce. Fraud and incredible luck. In the early 90s, Celeste faced charges of insurance fraud involving her car. She had burned the vehicle in the desert to collect a large payout, but her scam was soon uncovered. A case was opened, but Celeste got incredibly lucky. At the hearing, she encountered a sympathetic judge who sentenced her to community service and a fine equal to the insurance payout instead of prison time. Celeste needed money, so she got a job for the first time in her life. Thanks to her striking appearance and natural charm, she was hired as a waitress at an exclusive country club, where she soon met a widowed millionaire whom she quickly began to woo. Stephen felt sorry for her and invited her to his home, which was a huge stroke of luck for her. Celeste couldn't cook or do housework, so she did everything she could to make others do these tasks for her. She quickly gained the trust of the elderly man, taking advantage of his kindness and generosity. Soon the millionaire started taking his young companion out, introducing her to his friends and partners. By then, Beard's friends were already worried, seeing how cunning and greedy this woman was. However, the businessman wouldn't listen to anyone because he was simply captivated by the beauty. But Celeste was only interested in his money, and the man himself irritated her. In conversations with her daughter, she called him unflattering names, noting that he was fat, old, and disgusting, but she was willing to endure it for financial gain. Even Celeste's ex-husbands, upon learning what was happening, tried to warn the man about who he was involved with, but he didn't believe them. Beard proposed to her, and she naturally accepted right away. However, the businessman's close friends managed to convince him to at least draw up a prenuptial agreement to retain ownership of his property and control his wife's spending. Family life and extravagant spending. On February 18, 1995, the couple officially legalized their relationship. As a wedding gift, Celeste received $500,000, had access to her husband's accounts, and was set to inherit $1 million upon his death. After the wedding, Her daughter Christina moved into Beard's luxurious home, and a year later, after their father ended his life, Jennifer also moved in with her mother and stepfather. Celeste treated her husband with contempt, trying her best to undermine his health and hasten his demise. She made it a tradition to drink strong alcohol at dinner, adding sleeping pills to Stephen's drinks and food so he would fall asleep, allowing her to go out to entertainment venues. Meanwhile, she constantly thought about how to change the prenuptial agreement to maximize her inheritance after Beard's death. She convinced her husband to sell their house and buy another, arguing that she felt uncomfortable living where Stephen had spent many years with Alice. In reality, the scheming blonde wanted property acquired during the marriage. But this wasn't enough, and she began spending money from her millionaire husband's accounts. In the first month of their married life, Celeste spent over $100,000 on entertainment, shopping, and other personal needs. Her husband was bewildered, as no matter how much money he gave her, it was never enough. Moreover, Celeste stole and pawned jewelry that had belonged to the late Alice. When Stephen found out, he was so furious that he wanted not only to divorce her, but also to send her to jail. However, Celeste begged for forgiveness, telling him about her debts and the need to pay a fine for the insurance fraud case. The man believed her, helped pay off her debts, and decided to keep the marriage. Attempted murder. On October 2nd, 1999, around 3 a.m, a frightened man called emergency services, unable to explain what was happening. He said he woke up from a sharp burning pain in his abdomen, saw that his clothes and bed were covered in blood, and his internal organs were literally spilling out, which he was holding in with his hand. The man also said his wife was somewhere in the house, but he couldn't call out to her and was just bleeding out in his bedroom. The caller was Stephen, who truly had no idea what had happened to him, but understood that without immediate help, he would die. Fortunately, within minutes, paramedics and police arrived at the mansion and saw a horrifying scene. An elderly man sat in a chair covered in blood, holding the phone in one hand and trying to stem the blood flow from his abdomen with the other. They asked him if he had recently undergone surgery and if his stitches might have come apart, to which he responded negatively. Soon, Celeste and Christina appeared, seemingly unaware of what was happening, but they remained calm upon learning about the incident. They confirmed that Stephen had not undergone any surgeries, and he was taken to the hospital. This is where things got interesting, as it turned out that the businessman had been shot in the stomach while he slept. In his bedroom, police found a shotgun shell on the floor and sealed the room as a crime scene, declaring it an attempted murder. The first suspect was Mrs. Beard, but she claimed she was in another wing of the mansion at the time, and her daughters corroborated her story. Soon it was revealed that during her second stay in a psychiatric hospital, Celeste had met a woman named Tracy Tarleton, who was also a patient. They quickly developed a close relationship, and Celeste hinted that she would leave her husband if it weren't for him being a tyrant. Tracy took these words as a call to action and decided to remove the obstacle. Investigation, trial, and sentences. Tarleton didn't even try to hide. The shotgun she used was found in her home. Celeste vehemently denied her involvement, claiming that this woman was obsessed with her and acted alone. The accused chose to remain silent. Stephen survived, gradually recovered, and was soon discharged home. However, on January 22, 2000, he suddenly passed away due to a blood clot that had formed after the gunshot wound. Now, Tracy was no longer charged with attempted murder, but with the crime itself. Yet she remained silent until July of that same year, when the newly wealthy widow Celeste married Cole Johnson. Almost immediately after Celeste's fifth marriage, Tracy began testifying against her. She admitted her guilt in Stephen's death, but noted that she was driven to such a desperate act by her lover, who had promised they could be together after the man's demise. However, after eliminating her old husband with someone else's hands and inheriting his fortune, Celeste quickly married another man. Celeste denied all accusations against her, but everyone testified against her in court, even her own daughters, who confirmed that their mother never loved her fourth husband
and wished him dead to inherit his wealth sooner. Tracy made a deal with the prosecution and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She was released in August 2011. In the spring of 2003, Celeste Johnson was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole no earlier than 40 years. It was revealed that she also planned to get rid of Tarleton and was seeking a criminal to silence her lover and avoid punishment. After Victor Alexander Puterol committed the heinous crime, he carelessly went to the home of his girlfriend's father, Raina, ostensibly to retrieve forgotten children's clothes. There he took a tablet belonging to one of the victimized girls and pawned it at a nearby pawn shop, receiving about 500 pesos. The next day, he spent the equivalent of US $10 while vacationing on the beach with his best friend, Crystal. During the outing, he confessed that he had done something bad to his lover, but without any specific details. Crystal later said that by Victor's tone, words, and expressions, she guessed the seriousness of what had happened. She even allegedly tried to visit the house, intending to see if Raina and her children were all right. However, Victor refused the visit, citing the disorder and difficult emotional atmosphere in the family. That was enough for the girl to decide that she had done the best she could in the situation. Crystal did not go to the police. Concerned neighbors contacted the police later when the smell of decomposition emanating from Raina and Victor's home became so strong that it could no longer be ignored or explained by rotting garbage or dead animals on the property. The pungent, nauseating odor was undoubtedly coming from the recently moved couple's home, where flies were congregating at the windows. Since Raina and Victor had only recently moved into the house and had not yet made friends with the neighbors, no one had their phone numbers or any other means of contacting the couple. Moreover, no one had seen Raina, Victor, or the children for several days. Due to the inability to contact the homeowners and the frightening smell, concerned neighbors called emergency services. A few hours after the call, law enforcement officers picked the door lock and entered the home. Inside, they were greeted by a truly horrifying sight: the 4 lifeless bodies of Raina and her children. Raina's daughters were found in a room next to their mother, and the son was found hanging from a rung in a closet. It's unclear how the press was immediately on the scene, but no sooner had the detectives established the identity of the man who lived with Raina and fined him, as a report with shocking details of the death of the family went live on one of the major metropolitan TV channels. So Victor Alexander Puterol, while at work in his workshop, learned that the police had broken into his house and found the bodies of 4 victims. Realizing that he would soon be detained, he sent a message to the owner of the workshop. "I cut short the life of the love of my life. She loved me with all her soul, and I loved her too, a perfect love with no arguments. It's a very sad story." In messages to Miguel Uranga Marancini, he passed on the contacts of Raina's relatives, asking them to pass them on to the police. He explained that he only trusted Miguel, deeply regretted what had happened, and asked him to convey to the biker club his last wish. He would like to leave as a biker, with a large motorcycle escort at the funeral. The last message, after which Victor stopped replying to Miguel, read, "Now I don't believe anyone. Everyone wants to save me, but it's not going to happen. I'm leaving this damned world. I don't care what happens. I'm leaving. See you later." Miguel Uranga contacted the police, told them everything, and added that his friend had reportedly taken his own life. Law enforcement officers tracked the location of Victor's cell phone and went to the scene. Victor Alexander Puterol did not do anything to himself. Moreover, he didn't even think about it. He didn't even feel remorse or guilt for what had happened. The man knew he would be caught, and in a sense planned his arrest to make it as safe for himself as possible. Gathering his backpack of essentials, he headed to a small park not far from the workshop. For a while, he sat pensively on the sidewalk next to the park. A passerby approached him and asked if he needed help. Shaking his head from side to side, he replied that he was fine, stood up, walked into the park, and lay down on the grass. In this position, looking serenely at the sky and putting his hands behind his head, Victor lay there for almost an hour. Around 8 a.m., a national police van arrived. The man did not move or resist arrest. The arrest took less than 5 minutes. Raina Isabel Encarnacion was born in 1985 in the Dominican Republic. A few years after Raina was born, her parents decided to separate.
Her father left the family, but continued to support his ex-wife and daughter. Later, Raina's mother met another man, and the girl had a stepfather, who essentially became another father to her. Raina developed a great bond with her mother's new husband and maintained a warm relationship with her biological father. Both men treated her with warmth and care. Raina grew up to be an inquisitive and active child. She loved learning and enjoyed going to school. Her father's house was nearby, and she often saw him. It seemed that this intelligent and cheerful girl had a great future ahead of her. After successfully completing school, Raina entered university and began her higher education in commercial law. At the same time, she applied to the Autonomous University of Santo Domingo with the dream of obtaining a second degree in medicine. But she was not accepted and had to postpone her dream until the following year. When Raina turned 20, she met a man much older than herself, Daniel Bowden. Despite the significant age difference, a romantic spark ignited between them. A few months into their relationship, Raina became pregnant and the couple married. As a result of this union, they had 3 children, Daniela, Arakmina, and Angela. Raina had to give up her dream of getting a second higher education. At first, Raina and Daniel's marriage seemed ideal, but over time, the age difference began to affect their relationship, leading to frequent quarrels. Daniel realized that the constant conflicts are harmful to their children, and after 8 years of life together, the couple decided to separate. A long legal battle ensued, primarily concerning child custody. Unable to reach an agreement on their own, family court specialists intervened. They decided to conduct a psychological evaluation to help the children formulate who they wanted to live with. The experts concluded that the father should be the guardian, taking into account his age, financial situation, and the opinion of the older children. However, the judge making the final decision ignored the experts' recommendations and awarded custody of the older children to Raina. The youngest daughter, Angela, was to be raised in the custody of one of Daniel's sisters. Tragically, this decision deprived the children of not only a future, but a life. The years that followed showed that the judge should have heeded the advice of experts. It turned out that Raina's struggle was more about alimony than the children. After gaining custody of the older children, she immediately handed them over to her mother, believing it to be the best solution for everyone. She then initiated a new legal dispute over alimony payments. Raina claimed that her ex-husband had not paid her any of the court-ordered amount. Daniel countered that he had fulfilled all obligations, although he couldn't provide proof, claiming the payments were made in cash. The legal battle lasted several months and concluded in the mother's favor, with Daniel making another alimony payment. Significantly, during the second legal proceeding, Raina's own mother testified in defense of her former son-in-law, Daniel. She believed that Daniel was an excellent and responsible father who deserved better treatment. She emphasized that he and her daughter had shared 8 beautiful years together, with Daniel being a good, responsible husband and father. It's not to say that Raina neglected her children entirely. She visited them almost daily at their grandmother's place and regularly took them to her home on weekends. The rest of the time, she lived life to the fullest, making up for lost youth. At one of the parties, she met her new love, Victor Alexander Puturale. It's hard to imagine what attracted the young woman to Victor. He was 2 years younger than Raina. On one hand, Victor made a striking first impression. A mystically minded young man with long black hair and glowing white contact lenses, a biker and metalhead. On the other hand, he was a dirty, unkempt, introverted, and insecure guy. These peculiarities didn't deter the girl. Soon, the love-struck couple moved in together. Raina's mother accepted Victor. The young man won her over with his affability and numerous tales of the difficult life situations he had endured. He often and in detail spoke about his challenging childhood when his mother left him under the care of a strict and harsh father.
Unfortunately, manipulating the maternal instinct did not alert the children's grandmother. On the contrary, it endeared her to the manipulator. Victor was born in 1987. He indeed spent his early years with his father. It is unknown whether he was cruel to him. Victor learned to adapt to circumstances, even if they were uncomfortable for him, and no one in his surroundings saw anything odd about him, except for his appearance. From childhood, Victor never got into conflicts. He excelled in school and graduated with honors. He couldn't attend university only because his parents couldn't afford it. Therefore, he started looking for work and soon got an internship in a motorcycle repair shop. Since then, motorcycles became his passion. Over time, Victor acquired a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and joined the subculture of motorcycle enthusiasts and fans. A quiet, law-abiding citizen with no history of even a parking ticket, Victor nevertheless scared those around him, always in black clothes, with eye makeup, painted nails, and often white contact lenses. Very rarely did his control slip, revealing the lurking monster. After the incident, a neighbor recalled how he accidentally saw Victor Puterillo when he caught a neighbor's chicken, slit its throat, and drank the hot blood directly from the bird's wound. Raina and Victor took the children on weekends and sometimes on weekdays. The grandparents were very happy to have a break from their 3 noisy and active grandchildren. They saw that their daughter's new partner was kind and attentive to the children. Raina never complained to her parents about Victor, and in general, they never seemed to quarrel, which pleased her parents very much. The only shadow over this idyllic scene was a disturbing piece of information they had accidentally learned. Victor had a 10-year-old daughter whose biological mother had obtained a restraining order forbidding Victor from approaching the girl. Raina's parents couldn't understand why the mother would do such a thing. Raina's stepfather even followed Victor around a few times, but found nothing unusual or incriminating. The young man did not drink alcohol, did not use illegal substances, and was either at home or at work repairing motorcycles. He was never rude to the children, even when left alone with them. In other words, despite suspicions, he seemed like a normal person. Raina's parents wrote off the restraining order as her birth mother's eccentricity and settled down. The tale ended when the aunt who had been caring for the youngest daughter, Angela, informed Raina that she could no longer care for the girl. Around the same time, Raina's mother began having health problems, and the grandchildren had to move from their grandmother's house to Raina and Victor's. Suddenly, all 5 of them found themselves in a small apartment. However, the circumstances were very favorable. Raina was offered a new job with a higher salary. The reunited family moved into a spacious rented house with several separate rooms. A happy family life began. A spacious house, loving partners, children with their mother. Isn't that a sign that everything was going well? Perhaps it was, but soon Raina lost her job and the family faced some financial difficulties. According to Victor's mother, she even had to provide financial assistance to the young couple, as there was not enough money even for food, not to mention rent. Meanwhile, Raina's mother never heard about the difficulties her daughter was facing. Raina only occasionally brought the children to her mother's house, asking her grandmother to feed them well, which her grandmother was happy to do. In addition to the financial problems, something strange and clearly unhealthy began to happen in the couple. Raina had never complained to anyone about anything, but their relationship was far from normal. Shortly before the terrible events, Victor appeared on the street with short-cropped hair. It turned out that the couple had had a serious fight the night before, and Raina had cut off his long black hair as revenge while he slept. Additionally, Victor admitted that Raina threatened to leave him with the kids if he didn't find a well-paying job within a month. On Saturday, February 3, 2018, Raina went to her mother's house to pick up the children, who had been staying with their grandmother since Thursday. Raina's mother did not notice anything unusual in her daughter's behavior. On the contrary, she was sociable and in a normal mood. They had time to chat over a cup of tea while the children packed their things. The next day, early Sunday morning, February 4th, the girl and her mother had a brief telephone conversation during which they discussed current affairs and agreed to call each other later. Raina never contacted again. After numerous attempts to call and many text messages sent to her daughter and grandchildren, the woman called Victor, but he didn't pick up either. So the silence and ignoring of calls stretched for several days. Finally, on Wednesday, February 7th, Victor answered. He assured that everything was in order and promised that Raina would call back soon and explain everything in detail. He asked her not to worry and to wait for the call. The daughter never called back. It became clear to the parents that something terrible had happened. A day later, they received a call from law enforcement officers, from whom Raina's parents learned the horrifying details of what had happened. After the arrest, Victor Alexander immediately began to testify. He did not hide anything and did not count on leniency. According to him, he really wanted to end his life, but then changed his mind, believing that he should pay for what he had done. Thanks to the detailed testimony, it was possible to almost completely restore the chronology of events. On the morning of Sunday, February 4th, the roommates had another big fight in their shared bedroom. Victor struck Raina several blows on her neck, chest, and stomach, as a result of which she died. He then left her body locked in the room and sent Daniela, Raina's oldest child, to the store, asking her to buy him a pack of cigarettes. While the girl was gone, Victor went to the children's room and strangled Raina's daughter with a necktie while she slept. When Daniela returned from the store, he did the same thing to her as he had done to her sister. He then moved the children's bodies to the bedroom he shared with Raina. At that time, young Aramin was playing quietly in the small courtyard behind the house. Victor approached the boy and explained that his older sister had gone to the store and was too late, so he would take him to his aunt's house and then go look for Daniela. Aramin obediently went with Victor to the house of his aunt, Johanna Mendoza Coelho. Leaving the boy behind, the man returned to the house, intending to hide the consequences of his actions. It seems that it was only when he returned to the house that he realized that it was impossible to hide the truth, and it would inevitably be revealed. A few hours later, he returned for the boy and informed his aunt that Daniela had been found and it was time to go home. At home, Victor ended Aramin's life by hanging him from a rung inside a closet. The man claimed that he committed this crime because of the difficult financial situation they were all in, which he was psychologically unable to cope with. Victor's acquaintances confirmed that he had recently complained about family disagreements over money. Victor's mother told investigators that it was financial difficulties that had driven her son to a state of despair and forced him to commit such a grave act. The couple was already in a critical state, and their situation was exacerbated over the weekend when they did not receive their expected paycheck. I believe that it was this situation of my son, who was still a young man, being demanded money from a woman and her children, that pushed him to the edge, said Mrs. Joanna Mendoza, aunt of the accused. However, the extreme brutality of the crime was not consistent with a state of mental illness. The preliminary autopsy report clarified the situation, showing that all the female victims were not only deprived of their lives, but also abused. An investigation by the public prosecutor's office revealed that the victim, Reina Isabel Encarnacion, had repeatedly expressed concerns in correspondence with the accused on WhatsApp about the inappropriateness of intimate acts towards Angela while she was asleep. In one of the latest messages, the woman threatened her cohabitant that she would go to the police. Reina's mother told the police that the detained young man had always treated the three girls very well, but he had a special relationship with Angela. He carried her in his arms, often put her on his lap, hugged and kissed her. He even came up with a special nickname for her, Señorita. Investigators assumed that Victor had ended the lives of the family members not because of financial problems, but to cover up the wrongful acts committed against Angela. Forensic results confirmed that Reina, as well as the two girls, had been wrongfully abused. However, the experts could not determine whether the wrongful acts were committed before or after taking their lives, as the bodies were found at a late stage of decomposition. A psychiatric examination showed that Victor suffers from antisocial personality disorder, meaning he lacks both guilt and conscience. The heinous crime outraged and shocked the entire Dominican society. The trial began in January 2019 and was completed in just 2 days. Testimony was given by experts and forensic experts, investigators, and various witnesses. Especially a lot of information was obtained from Victor's friends. For example, Crystal, the defendant's best friend, said that on the day of his arrest, he gave her all of his social media passwords and his mother's phone number. According to her, it seemed that the young man was planning to leave his life. Another friend of the young man said that Victor confessed the crime to him in detail a few days before his arrest, but the confession was so horrifying that the friend took it as a joke. In general, everyone who had ever seen or met the accused was shocked by his act. Neighbors, teachers, co-workers, they always saw him as a quiet guy with a distinctive appearance and nothing more. He didn't seem confrontational, wasn't known as a brawler, and, according to them, never spoke ill of others. He just wasn't very social. Victor's only diagnosis as a child was attention deficit disorder, but according to his mother, the condition didn't cause any problems for the family or himself. Some 18 witnesses, including 2 forensic experts, testified at the trial. The latter provided such shocking details that even Victor's mother asked for the full weight of the law to fall on her son. "Justice must be served. He must pay for everything he has done," she said in court. She begged Reina's family to forgive her for having such a son and shared their grief. Victor Alexander Puterol pleaded guilty in court to taking the lives of Reina Isabel Encarnacion and her 3 children. He also apologized to the victim's family and the public for the crime. "I accept the facts, and not everything that was said happened exactly as described. I realize that I cannot turn back time and bring back the lives I took. I apologize to the community and all family members for what happened. I contributed to my arrest because I realized that by ending my life, I would not be able to pay for my actions," Victor Puterol calmly stated. The man received the most severe sentence then available in the Dominican Republic's judicial system, 30 years. At the time the sentence was pronounced, he was just 30 years old, meaning that under fortunate circumstances, he could leave prison and live the rest of his life in freedom. This possibility seriously urged the National Congress to expedite updates to the criminal code. The country's code, adopted in 1844, does not include cumulative punishment for multiple crimes. Had the updated criminal code, currently under consideration in the National Congress, been in effect, Victor Alexander would have faced a sentence of up to 60 years for his crime. The life-taking of Reina and her children drew attention to the urgency of replacing the code as soon as possible. Nevertheless, it can be said that justice prevailed. The perpetrator received the maximum sentence. At least Reina's mother, speaking on various television programs, stated that she was satisfied with the outcome of the case. The biological father of the 3 children who were taken cannot yet accept what happened. He stated that the tragedy with his children would not have occurred if the judge had listened to the experts and granted him custody. On July 3, 1989, another child was born in the municipality of Estreito in the state of Maranhão in Brazil. The boy was named by a common Portuguese name, Danilo. This child was not spoon-fed or stroked on the head with bedtime stories. He was not taken by the hand to school at school age. He grew up on the streets like all the children in this poor neighborhood. The environment for adults and children in Brazil's favelas is one of oppressive poverty, low living standards, and unemployment. All of these factors are the basis for street crime to thrive. When from childhood there is only dirt, poverty, lack of human conditions, and normal food, all existing instincts of self-preservation are activated. Everyone survives as they can or as they want. And unfortunately, more often than not, a person who from childhood has seen only violence and the speed of the result obtained by force will choose the same road of life because otherwise he does not know how. Our story today is about the horrific brutality and unwavering obsession that dooms people. In 2019, Sarah Brandau was excited to welcome her younger sister Deborah and 2 nephews, a boy named Ian and a girl named Yasmin, to the airport. After a failed relationship with the children's father, Deborah, 30, driven by a genuine desire and drive to provide a better life for her children, moved from Brazil to Pennsylvania to live with her sister. The family quickly settled into their new place, accustomed to the cozy home and new standard of living. Deborah Brandau and her sister Sarah were inseparable. Not only did they work together in the cleaning service, but they often talked on the phone during the day. They lived the quiet and happy life they had come to another country for. But an unexpected acquaintance changed the fates of all the heroes forever. In 2020, spending a day off with children in the park, Deborah met her compatriot, 31-year-old Danilo Cavalcante. A trusting relationship quickly developed between the young people. The man was very attentive to her and kind to her children. Deborah fell in love with her Brazilian neighbor Danilo Cavalcante and decided that she had met a suitable and trustworthy man. After a few months of their relationship, they rented a small house and began living as a full-fledged family. After a while, the hot and emotional Danilo began to get bored with the perfect family life. The closer their relationship with Deborah became, the more jealous and obsessive he became. Mistrust arising from nothing gradually turned into total control. Between the couple constantly began to erupt scandals, which ended in violence. Danilo got drunk every night and came home a completely different person. He was like an angry animal. From Deborah, he demanded complete submission and obedience, and in case of resistance, he punished her severely in front of the children. The woman was not weak. She defended herself as best she could and would not let her beloved children be harmed. Unwilling to tolerate such treatment, she returned to her sister's home, and after repeated threats, she went to the police and then to court to obtain an order of protection prohibiting Cavalcante from approaching her. Despite Deborah's numerous attempts to distance herself from Cavalcante, he pursued her fiercely, resorting to threats of violence if she dared to permanently sever the relationship. Fearing for her life, Deborah conducts a small investigation in search of answers about Danilo Cavalcante's identity. After contacting acquaintances in Brazil through social media, she finds information about Danilo's former life and the reasons for his entry into the United States. The woman realizes that her lover is not who he claims to be, and the received information throws her into shock. It turned out that on November 5, 2017, while in his native Brazil, Danilo Cavalcante fatally wounded 20-year-old student Walter Jr. Moreira dos Reis, shooting him 5 times near a restaurant in the city of Figueirópolis. An investigation revealed that the two were friends, and the killing was over Walter's car repair debt. A week after the crime, the Brazilian judicial system granted the prosecutor's office's request for preventive detention, issuing an arrest warrant. But Brazilian authorities did not have time to detain Danilo. Cavalcante was able to leave the country through Brasília International Airport because of a disagreement by the Tocantins judicial system, which did not request that the decision be registered in the National Warrant Registry until 7 months after the crime. Cavalcante entered Puerto Rico illegally. A warrant for his arrest was issued in Brazil in June 2018. After entering Puerto Rico, Cavalcante obtained a fake ID and eventually settled in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where his sister lived. After Danilo's true identity was revealed, Deborah gave him an ultimatum to either leave her alone or she would publicize his identity. This was the woman's fatal mistake. On the evening of April 18, 2021, Deborah was walking with her children in front of her house. The children were playing catch-up, and the woman was chatting quietly with an elderly neighbor. Danilo Cavalcante pulled her aside to talk. The neighbor remained waiting for Deborah and only watched the former lovers chatting. The conversation was calm, but at one point, Cavalcante pulled out 2 knives and suddenly attacked her. Deborah fell down, and he stabbed her several times. Deborah's children screamed all along the street for him not to touch their mom, but the man was in agony. He stabbed Deborah a total of 38 times. A neighbor who observed the brutal scene desperately tried to administer emergency aid and stop the bleeding. Deborah's daughter ran to the neighbor's house to ask for help and call emergency services. Deborah Brandau was taken to Pauli Hospital, but eventually died from her injuries. Meanwhile, Danilo Cavalcante fled Pennsylvania to avoid arrest and was on the run for several hours until he was found and arrested by Virginia State Police. He was extradited to Pennsylvania, where he was placed under arrest, pending trial. On August 16, 2023, in Chester County, Danilo Cavalcante's trial for first-degree murder began. The investigation revealed that Cavalcante refused to accept the end of their relationship and had intimidated Deborah since 2020 with regular domestic violence. During Cavalcante's trial, Deborah's crying child testified, recalling over and over again the horrifying events of that bloody day. It took the jury only 15 minutes to reach a guilty verdict. Cavalcante was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was announced, Cavalcante was sent to the Chester County Jail in Pocopson, where he was awaiting transfer to a federal prison. But on August 31, 2023, at about 9 a.m., he escaped from the Chester County Jail using a chimney. Like a Spider-Man, He went up across the wall between two cramped hallways and so ascended through the chimney to the roof. Deftly bypassed the barbed wire fences and escaped. Surveillance footage showed the prisoner in the narrow space between two walls in the exercise yard. He put his arms and legs on either side and walked upwards. He then ran across the roof, climbed over the fence, and pushed through the barbed wire to freedom. Prison officials were very aware of all the vulnerabilities that had been identified in the prison after Igor Bolta's escape, and believed that they had been addressed. Officials believed that the barbed wire added after a similar escape by an inmate named Igor Bolta a few months earlier would prevent a jailbreak, said Acting Warden Howard Holland. According to court documents in May, an inmate named Igor Bolta climbed onto the roof of the jail and jumped to a less secure location. He was captured less than a mile from the prison about 5 minutes after escaping.
Again, the one thing we didn't take into account was the failure on the human factors side. We only focused on the physical infrastructure, not the human factor, Howard Holland said shortly after Cavalcante disappeared. Whoever was supposed to be monitoring the prison's 160 cells did not see the escape unfold, Holland said. A guard in a tower that overlooked the prisoners did not see Cavalcante slip away. The tower guard was first placed on administrative leave and then fired. As a matter of urgency, the prison was closed, and the search for a particularly dangerous criminal began. Alerts were everywhere. Danilo Cavalcante, age 33, black hair, possibly armed and very dangerous. The escape of a dangerous killer from state prison has gotten a lot of publicity. The search for the fugitive was broadcast daily on all media channels. The Pennsylvania State Police Chief, who led the search for Cavalcante, held regular press conferences and briefings, providing accurate information to state residents about the special operation. He urged residents not to stay on the sidelines, but to take an active role, through vigilance and observation, to help determine the perpetrator's route. And it worked. So, about a few hours after the escape, Danilo Cavalcante was spotted walking along a road about 2 miles west of the prison. With the help of reports from local residents, Cavalcante was spotted using a surveillance camera in the early morning hours of September 2nd. Police set up a search perimeter around the area, securing the roads and railroads that run through it to prevent Cavalcante's potential escape, and put up a $10,000 reward for any information leading to his capture. Authorities began searching within 2 miles of the jail in the heavily wooded area of Pocopson Township and Chester County. A local resident spotted the fugitive in a creek bed just days after the escape, but he fled into the woods before police could find him. The search continued. The search perimeter expanded after he spent about a week on the run. A security camera captured Cavalcante at Longwood Gardens, a popular botanical garden nearly 3 miles from the jail, just south of where law enforcement initially searched for him. There's a lot of ravines, a lot of high fields, a lot of grass, a lot of cover for a guy 5 feet tall and 120 pounds, Robert Clark, Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, said September 5th. In addition to the difficult, rugged terrain, searchers had a hard time coping with the extreme heat and humidity that stood for days. After a week of desperate searches for the fugitive felon, the number of officers involved in the search for Cavalcante on the ground has grown from 250 to nearly 400. We have a large perimeter secured. We're very optimistic, the police chief said. The search team has been strengthened not only in numbers, but also in the equipment attached to the search. Helicopters flying over the search area began playing a recorded message from Cavalcante's Portuguese-speaking mother begging Cavalcante to surrender peacefully to authorities. The next morning, Cavalcante was spotted by a security camera on a property located about 2 miles south of the prison. Police moved in, set up a new perimeter around the facility, and Longwood Gardens, as well as schools in close proximity to the search area, will be closed while the search is conducted. Police continued an intensive search for the object for the rest of the week, and Longwood Gardens briefly reopened to limited access until forced to evacuate and close again after another sighting of the object on September 7th. That same day, Police increased the reward for information leading to his capture from $10,000 to $20,000. After nearly a week of searching, nerves were on edge. Locals knew a man convicted of murder was on the loose, but authorities still hadn't told them how Cavalcante escaped from prison. Philadelphia residents in Chester County were asked by police to lock all doors and windows, secure vehicles, and stay indoors. CBS News reported 34-year-old Danilo Cavalcante escaped from a Pennsylvania prison.
The intense search continued until a major event on September 9th, when Cavalcante apparently broke through the search perimeter in Longwood Gardens when he was spotted on a video intercom call standing on the front porch of a former colleague's home near Phoenixville, nearly 20 miles northeast of the search perimeter. Cavalcante had a deft way of changing his appearance. He was shaved and dressed in new clothes. Danilo moved around the state with sophistication and managed to go undetected. So he stole a van from a local dairy store and drove it to Phoenixville, hoping to get help and shelter from acquaintances. On the morning of September 10th, a stolen van with an empty gas tank was found abandoned in a field in suburban East Mantmeal. The search area moved to the northern part of Chester County. The fugitives' movements again changed the search perimeter. On September 11th, as the search continued, Cavalcante was added to the Interpol list, and authorities increased the reward for information on his whereabouts. That same night, emergency services received a call from a local resident. He reported that a man similar in description had broken into the garage of his home. The homeowner was forced to open fire in self-defense and shot him 7 times. But Cavalcante was able to escape the home and steal a .22 caliber rifle with a scope and flashlight from the home. Police immediately arrived on the scene and found Cavalcante's sweatshirt and shoes in close proximity to the home. Once the identity of the perpetrator was confirmed and it was determined that the dangerous felon was now armed, police urged residents in the South Coventry neighborhood to lock all doors, windows, and vehicles and stay indoors if possible. The convicted felon is armed with a handgun and is particularly dangerous. Cavalcante's escape has alarmed many area residents. School districts canceled classes for the day after Cavalcante was spotted on surveillance video. Police expanded the search and urged residents to keep their doors locked. Police set up a new search perimeter in South Coventry Township that was tighter than previous ones, because they were certain Cavalcante was now surrounded. The search continued throughout the day on September 12th. Around 1 a.m. on September 13th, an aircraft with thermal imaging technology spotted Cavalcante in the woods. Despite the sighting, police had to wait until sunrise to approach due to inclement weather that prevented the surveillance plane from operating safely. The big breakthrough came in the early morning hours of September 13th, when authorities learned that a security alarm went off shortly after midnight within the final search perimeter. According to Bivens, an Office of Illicit Drug Enforcement aircraft using thermal imaging technology detected a heat signal in the area around 1 a.m. The alarm was triggered. Technology really played a major role in this, said Ron Johnson, a retired Missouri State Highway Patrol captain. Things went against law enforcement for a long time, but they paused in time and were able to pick up the heat signature from a DEA spy plane. Around 8 a.m. on September 13th, police found Cavalcante asleep with the rifle he had stolen from his home 2 nights earlier. Danilo Cavalcante, a dangerous criminal, attempted to escape by crawling into thick undergrowth, but a police dog named Yoda subdued him by biting his head and holding him until police arrived. Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens said at a news conference that Yoda caused Cavalcante minor head injuries during his capture. They were able to land very quietly, Bivens said. We have the element of surprise, and that allowed us to capture the fugitive without casualties. Cavalcante was questioned by police immediately after his capture, where he said he survived on watermelons in creek water, traveled only at night, and even once almost got caught by a police officer while hiding. Cavalcante planned to steal a car and travel to Canada. Since returning to prison, Cavalcante has been charged with multiple crimes related to his escape, including burglary, trespassing, and theft. Following the capture of high-risk felon Danilo Cavalcante, local and state officials, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, expressed gratitude to the many law enforcement officers who assisted in the search. Chester County District Attorney Deb Ryan stated, "Today is a great day here in Chester County. Our nightmare is finally over, and the good guys won. We are indebted to all first responders for their tireless and dedicated efforts to bring this fugitive to justice. They worked around the clock, and we are deeply grateful to them all." Chief George Bivens, who led the search, discussed the various challenges law enforcement officers had to overcome to find Cavalcante, noting the intense heat and thunderstorms that occurred in the area during the search, as well as the fact that each of the search perimeters established during the search were in heavily wooded areas. The search team consisted of approximately 500 law enforcement officers, including Pennsylvania State Police, FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals, who searched the area around the shooting scene. Police established a perimeter of several miles in each direction. Following Cavalcante's escape, the Chester County Jail Board, which oversees the Chester County Jail, was heavily criticized by residents in the area for failing to prevent Cavalcante's escape. Residents noted that the jail had the opportunity to make appropriate security improvements following Igor Bolte's May 19th escape attempt, and that those improvements could have potentially prevented Cavalcante's escape because he used the same method Bolte used to escape. The prison has already fired the prison guard who was on duty during Cavalcante's September 7th escape, with prison officials claiming that the guard had the opportunity to spot Cavalcante during the escape. Days after the offender's capture, the Chester County Jail announced that they had installed a tin roof over the area, where Cavalcante climbed up 2 walls to access the roof and escape, along with various other security measures and improvements. I think there are obviously questions that Chester County officials are going to have to answer as to how the suspect was able to escape, especially given the history of this prison, said Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. The communication, cooperation of all law enforcement agencies and local residents who came together during what has been such a long search for the state helped to catch and honorably punish the evil. Danilo will now never go free.